So we are now live, and I'm going to start the webinar, which will let attendees in. There's Jay.
Okay.
And let's see who we've got in attendees.
Let's see who we've got. I see 4 of them right now.
Yeah, it takes a second, then they'll.
Oh yeah, they're starting to populate.
Yeah.
Although with many repeats, I say, or maybe that's just how it does it first.
No, it populates in a funny way.
Yeah.
It tries to do it alphabetically, but it can't.
I see some of our regulars and some new folks too.
Yep. Well, we quickly got to 20, so.
All right, we're going to start. Oh, good. We have almost all our committee members. I don't see Doug McGowan yet. I'm still on one screen here of pictures. So we're missing Doug McGowan on the committee so far. We have a number of non-committee board members with us, and we're going to have a number of special guests as attendees, and of course, the second item is going to be joint with our transportation. Okay, so I'm Clary Newelt, and I'm chair of the Parks and Environment Committee of Community Board 7. This is our regular January meeting of the committee. We have a long and very varied agenda tonight. So we're going to try to keep the meeting moving along. And on each of our separate items, we're going to have a presentation and discussion. We're going to have some time for committee members and non-committee board members to ask questions or participate. Try to make some time in each case, each separate item for members of the public to do that as well. When we get to that, we will be asking members of the public to raise their virtual hands. But we're not there yet on any of these items. Anybody who is not speaking or about to speak, please stay on mute for the most part to avoid background noise. And Susan Schwartz, who is up on my screen, she's the top right. I don't know where she is on other screens. She's going to be taking the minutes tonight. Mark Diller, our immediate prior board chair, is still stuck being our trusty IT person for tonight.
Glad to do it. Not.
Well, we hope not to make you do this forever, Mark. We are very grateful to you. Stephen Brown, who's the bottom row on my screen, raised his hand, is our new board chair who's succeeded Mark. So he's joining us tonight. Oh, good. So we also have 2 of our regulars from the Parks Department, and then we'll move into our first item. We've got middle row on my screen, Jeff Martin, who's a day-to-day manager of Riverside Park. Welcome, Jeff, as always. And on the third row, at least in my screen, we have Matt Genrich, who manages the parks in our district other than Riverside and Central. And we have a number of members of our various CB7 committees other than our Parks and Environment Committee. So everybody's welcome. And let's get started with our first item. Our first item is a presentation and discussion with Emily Watson. Do I have that right?
Walker. That's actually my childhood. But my childhood best friend is Emily Watson, so I'll take it. Right. I'm Emily Walker.
I'm sorry.
And my son Emmett has barged into the room, so
Hello,
I'll try to do this with minimal disruption. But
Emily Walker, who will put on the screen or put on whatever in a moment to do your presentation and then some questions, is a representative of New Yorkers for Parks, which is a local park advocacy group that we've had very little interface with over the years. But recently we were put together. A connection was made in connection with one of our initiatives that we'll talk about a little more later, which is to try to make our city parks completely smoke-free. Emily was very helpful in establishing some contacts and pursuing those. And we'll talk about that issue as an update later. But Emily, we're ready for you and your family to do a little slide presentation. We're going to try to keep this to half an hour, and I've already taken 5 minutes of your time.
No, that's fine.
Let's get started with Emily, and between you and Mark, you'll show the slides. I'll try to do it around 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions and comments and discussion. Okay, Emily, you're on.
All right, thanks so much, Clary.
I can't really see you.
Okay, all right, yes, get my playground tester out of the way. I'm gonna share my screen to show you all a presentation. I wanted to, give an overview of who we are as an organization. So thank you all for inviting me to present tonight. I'm going to give sort of a high-level overview of who we are at New York Worcester Parks. I'm Emily Walker. I'm the Director of Outreach and Programs. I do a lot of work to support community members who are active stewards and volunteers in their parks, but also to support New Yorkers who want to advocate for more resources or funding for their local parks and open spaces. So that's kind of who I am and what I do in brief. And I'm going to walk you all through kind of just the resources that we have as an organization and the various initiatives that we oversee as an organization. So with that, I will move on to, if I can figure out my, okay, there we go. So we're a nonprofit, we're a 501c3, we're independent of the city of New York. And we do primarily research, but like I said, we're an advocacy-based organization. We do a lot of partnerships with park organizations throughout the city, including the Riverside Park Conservancy, which I know is really active in Community District 7. So sorry, y'all. This day and age is really fun for working parents. And the sort of reason for us to exist, I think anyone who pays attention to parks and open spaces in the city knows that, funding, public funding for parks, it has been really stretched thin for decades now. We've existed as an organization for over 112 years now, and we've had kind of different focuses and iterations in that lengthy amount of time. But I would say in the last 20 years in particular, we've really tried to focus on providing data to New Yorkers and to decision makers about how open space is provided for different communities, whether it is, whether it isn't. Also to do sort of a view of conditions in parks for folks that may be able to use that to work with their elected officials or with their park managers to get different outcomes. So one of our signature programs, which I'll go into a little more detail in a bit, but some of you may be familiar with, is the Daffodil Project, is our signature public program. It started after 9/11. It's a living memorial to the victims of September 11th. And it's a program where we distribute free daffodil bulbs each fall to New Yorkers who are willing to plant them in public spaces throughout the 5 boroughs. Obviously that could be parks, but we also work with a lot of tree stewards and block associations, schools that do schoolyard beautification. So it's a really wonderful way to beautify the various aspects of the public realm in New York City. We were unfortunately unable to do the program this past fall due to COVID, but we're very eager to bring it back this next fall for the 20th anniversary of the program. We do a lot of public outreach and meetings, so that can play out in meetings like this with community board members, but we also try to gather park advocates and stewards to really get a sense of what's happening on the ground in neighborhoods throughout the city. We're a really small organization, so we really depend on connecting with folks throughout the 5 boroughs who care about their parks and open spaces to have a deeper understanding of what's happening on the ground in various neighborhoods. We provide technical assistance, and I'll go over some of the resources we have that can help with that in just a few moments. And we also, like I said, provide some research and data that is independently created. So I'll start by going over some of our research initiatives. This is a small sneak preview of our soon to be released open space profiles. They will be released, I believe, in the next month or so. We're just finalizing the reports now and getting the data all pretty for the public, but this is a resource we've created since 2001. It's generally been done every 5 years with council districts as the boundaries that we look at. We provide a provision of the open spaces in a given district, what kind of open space it is. So it's both a way for someone who lives in the city to see, what they have in their part of the city in terms of open space access. But then the backside is a sort of high level data set that we have with various demographic information, parkland access information. We do a look at the kinds of open space amenities that districts have. We're really excited because we're actually, for the first time ever, doing these on community district boundaries for the 2021 iteration. The reason for that is that there is going to be redistricting happening in the city based on the 2020 census. So we knew that in 2022, city council district boundaries are going to be changing. So we wanted to create something that had a little more of a long shelf life. And so community districts seemed like a really good fit. Obviously, community boards play a really critical role in advocating for and elevating open space issues throughout the city. And also the Parks Department itself manages parks and community district boundaries. So it's kind of an interesting and good fit, and we're excited about the change. So we'll hopefully be coming back to you all very soon when we have these released and more public, and I can show you more than just a very brief snapshot. So more to come on that. We also do a series called the Open Space Index. This is a report that is done on a neighborhood specific level. We've looked at a variety of neighborhoods, and actually I think there might be an error. I think we've looked at 10 neighborhoods throughout the city with this particular report. We have not yet, unfortunately, done the Upper West Side, but we have done the East Side of Manhattan, as well as some neighborhoods in the outer boroughs. But it's a very deep dive into neighborhoods to see how those neighborhoods are stacking up to the city's own benchmarks that it has set in terms of open space access and provision. So it's in a lot of ways very similar to the snapshot data we provide in our open space profiles that I just highlighted, but it goes much deeper and, like I said, on a neighborhood scale. So it's a great resource for folks who live in these neighborhoods. I wish I could say we had one for the Upper West Side, but so far that is an elusive goal. These are really labor intensive reports, so we really rely on significant funding to make them happen. But it's something that has been really a great tool for neighborhoods, especially underserved neighborhoods throughout the city that either have lacked open space investments, or have parks but that aren't in the best condition and maybe need capital overhauls. It's been a great tool for communities to advocate for those changes. Moving on, this is one that I'm particularly proud of. Our How Can I Improve My Park guide was completed in 2014. It's a pretty evergreen resource that we did in partnership with the Center for Urban Pedagogy and our friends at Partnerships for Parks. But it is, if I was with you all physically, I would have them with me to show you. It folds out into a giant poster. You can view it as a PDF on our website. I should say everything I'm highlighting right now is available as a PDF on our website, which I'll show at the end. But this particular guide is a sort of crash course for the everyday New Yorker on how they can advocate for improvements, whether that's trying to get their park better maintained on a regular basis, or if they want to get a complete capital overhaul of their park or a part of their park. It walks you through the process of who do you need to speak to start that process. Community boards obviously play a huge role in that. So we do highlight the role that community boards play in navigating the capital process for the city of New York. But it's a really great way to sort of demystify how things get changed and how park infrastructure can be improved. And it's a resource that we're really proud of. And we have it available in English and Spanish. And hopefully as funding comes through in future years, we'll be able to expand the reach of that in additional languages. But it's something that we're really proud of. And if you're interested in this process, I think it's great for parks, but it can also be applicable to other areas of working with the city. So for us, it's just one of our civics lessons that we've created that we're really proud of. Some of our other resources that we have a clean and green guide that we completed a few years back that just kind of explains who cleans our parks, what are the different staff levels. It's something that I think a lot of New Yorkers don't actually realize. It's not the most transparent system to really understand, like, who are the folks that are doing the really important day-to-day work in our parks. So this is just a really quick guide that we have in English, Spanish, and simplified Chinese that shows who the folks are that are working in your parks and making them look clean and beautiful, and how you can start to connect with them. So that's a great sort of primer for folks who are interested in getting more involved in stewardship or advocacy around specific open spaces. We have an Improve Your Park toolkit, which is kind of a high-level snapshot of the various resources that New Yorkers for Parks has available to folks who are interested in park advocacy, as well as some of the tools from our peer organizations that we think are useful for folks that are working in this space. It also has kind of a quick timeline of the various things that you can do to really plug into the process of trying to advocate for improvements. Our Public Realm Bill of Rights was our 2017 campaign platform, but it's still sort of an evergreen resource and kind of a guiding document that we use at New Yorkers for Parks in terms of thinking about what should New Yorkers have access to when it comes to open space. How should parks be funded? What kinds of benefits and systems should they be providing, from ecosystem services to public health outcomes? So it kind of is our North Star in terms of thinking about how we complete our research and what goals we're trying to emphasize as we do our work. The Daffodil Project, which I already mentioned, it's a really fantastic program. For those of you who are interested, I would encourage you to sign up on our newsletter list through ny4p.org. That's the best way to stay on top of all of the work that we do organizationally, but especially when bulb distribution time comes. We haven't figured out the mechanics of what the next fall will look like for this program, but it's something we're starting to think through now because we really want to bring it back. It was really devastating to us to not be able to do it this past fall. So for us to have this program come back, it's one of the few ways that we physically help change the face of the city of New York and support New Yorkers who are interested in beautification of their communities. And daffodil bulbs are really forgiving. They're beautiful. They come back year after year. And if you are someone who doesn't have a lot of horticultural experience or gardening experience, it's a pretty fail-safe way to get something in the ground that's going to come back year after year and make your block look brighter or your local playground look brighter. Kids can plant them, seniors can plant them. It's just a really fantastic way that we can help support neighborhoods that are trying to, beautify their communities. One of our really interesting projects that was done in the last couple of years is a podcast that was created by one of our staff members. She started as a fellow. Her name is Jessica Saab. She's now a full-time team member at NY4P. But when she was a fellow, she created a podcast that's specifically about the history of community gardens in New York City. It's called Lots to Grow. She did a lot of interviews with community gardeners and advocates throughout the city. And it's a really rich and deep dive into the community garden system in New York City. And it's a fantastic way for us to help highlight this really beautiful part of the Parks Department system that I think often can get kind of overlooked, especially if you aren't a gardener directly. So it's a really interesting and unique thing that we've created in recent years, and we're really proud of the work that Jessica did on this. So for those of you who are podcast listeners, I would highly recommend it. It's a really fantastic way to learn a little bit more about the recent history of New York City and how community gardens and open space fit into that. I'm going to wrap things up by talking about our most recent advocacy campaign that we launched in 2019, which is called Play Fair. We came together with our friends at the New York League of Conservation Voters, District Council 37, which is the Park Workers Union, and the City Council Parks Committee to really try and create a coalition-based advocacy effort to push for more investment for parks. When we launched the campaign in the winter of 2019, we focused with a $100 million ask around the expense budget for parks. The expense budget, for those of you who aren't as aware of how the city budget works, that funds the sort of day-to-day maintenance and operations staff, gardeners, PEP officers, or Parks Enforcement Police, I should say, acronyms. I should not use them so much. Our urban park rangers, who are really unsung heroes of our park system, and we would love to see more of them. And rec center staff, programming costs. So expense dollars are for the Parks Department often in really short supply. For many years, the Parks Department's expense budget has hovered around just barely more than 0.5% of the entire city operating budget. And to contrast that with how much land the agency has to take care of, almost 14% of the city of New York is parkland under the jurisdiction of New York City Parks. So for them to get such a tiny fraction of the city budget that is dedicated for the agency to maintain and program and operate and beautify that land is a really shocking mismatch, we think, in terms of how the city is prioritizing funding for parks. So the first year of the campaign, we were able to get a $44 million addition out of our $100 million ask, which was a really thrilling, win for our coalition. We now have over 300 organizations throughout the city that are part of the Play Fair Coalition. Last year, we started an advocacy push to try and, keep the funding renewed that we had gained, get additional expense funding because we knew it was just a start to get 44 million. And we also wanted to start to ask for capital funding, which, the infrastructure of our parks is also a really overlooked but critical component of how the city should be spending its dollars, but frankly hasn't been for many years. Then COVID happened and the city's budget outlook changed very quickly. We really drastically had to scale back our ask to focus on things that our coalition believed were, really key to keeping city parks clean and safe and well maintained during the pandemic. I think we all have had the experience the past almost year now that this has been going on, that parks have really been one of the few outlets that we have as New Yorkers. They're spaces that are outdoors, they're relatively safe. We know from a public health standpoint now, they're one of the few places we can gather with folks that aren't from our household, and be socially distanced and get, you know, fresh air and just all of the untold benefits that being in nature and in open space provide. So we really want to see the city you know, place some emphasis on that and place some budget numbers behind that that really reflect the importance of parks. So we are teeing up now. I'll just show you the sort of brief. This was like the vision when we started Playfair of our 5-year plan. Things have obviously gotten a little off track because we could not have anticipated that, you know, a pandemic would hit. Yeah, and there have been so many conversations around city budgets, and it's been a really interesting time to do this work. We're still very deeply committed to trying to get more funding for the agency, and we'll have more information soon for folks who are interested in joining us in that effort. But you know, not only do we need to fight for more funding just in the annual budget cycle for parks, but we also know that this year we have a really significant election happening. We'll have a new mayor, we'll have a new borough president, we're going to have a new comptroller. 2/3 of the city council is turning over for a 2-year term, and then that council term is turning over again in 2023. So there's a lot happening in a relatively short amount of time in terms of the balance of power in the city of New York, and really trying to get in front of these candidates because there will be so many new faces in City Hall that we want to ensure that parks and open spaces are not left behind and are not continually, you know, the thing that's viewed for some reason as a luxury by the city. We believe that parks are critical city infrastructure. They make neighborhoods livable. They're arguably now providing public health benefits that we could not have even anticipated. So we really want to start to focus on, you know, both the short-term funding needs that we know the agency has, as well as thinking about sort of the long-term vision of how can we make parks more equitable, more stable in their funding streams in the future, because the system that we've had is just, it's not working. And so this is sort of the high level Playfair overview, and you can learn more again on our website about Playfair in particular. But, you know, we're starting to enter budget season. I'm sure many of you who are joining tonight are well aware of that. If you aren't, that's your education for the night, I guess. The city budget process runs generally from January to June 30th. So we're going to have a lot of work ahead of us, and we need as many New Yorkers as possible to join us in pushing the city to make these investments. So if you're interested, I will put up my information. Our website is ny4p.org, and you can also find us on social media. Our handle is ny4p. I've put up my contact information, so if anyone wants to reach out to me directly after this presentation, I'm always happy to chat with folks. That's, you know, my job. So with that, do you want me to stop sharing my screen, or should I leave it up for the Q&A portion?
I think stop showing your screen.
Sure.
Good. And good. So just in about 15 seconds, we're going to turn to spending a few minutes with questions and comments from board members and the public. But I just wanted to say something I forgot to say before, which is all board members, please put your name into the chat, which is the way that we record attendance. I just remembered to do it a couple minutes ago, and I saw that other people then started doing that, other board members. The other thing is, for everybody, please try to limit your comments in the chat, or your whatever you put into the chat, to things that are directly relevant to what we're talking about. The more there is in the chat, the harder it is to read it and follow it and deal with what's really relevant. So, okay, so let's first, we're nearly used the time allocated on this. We can go a little bit over. Let's first turn to any board members, or any committee members, and then other board members who want to either ask or mention something to in this part of the discussion, and then we'll see if we can catch some attendees from the community as well with our limited time. Who do we have from our first committee? You can either raise your hand physically, or that's probably best,
I don't know if you can see, but Ken and Jay have their hands up.
I see Ken, and I haven't seen Jay. Ken, you want to go first?
Okay. Thank you, Emily, for coming and telling us about New Yorkers for Parks. I just there are concerns that funding for parks is not equitably distributed around the city, and I'm wondering, I mean, we all know that Central Park gets a lot of funding, and Riverside Park's less so, and then you move on to the Bronx and such, and I'm wondering, So I'm just wondering if you get into the equity issues in the distribution of funding.
Absolutely. And that's a really great question. I'm glad you asked, Ken. I think a lot of parks that can benefit from nonprofit alliances or conservancies like Central Park, Riverside, having those private organizations that can fundraise for the park, in some instances do capital construction, as well as hiring maintenance staff. It's an incredible resource for the neighborhoods that have the ability to have an organization like that. We know at New Yorkers for Parks that not every neighborhood can support having that kind of high level nonprofit, right? That depends on a steady stream of funding, often from residents who live proximate to the park. So one of the things that we are really keen to do as an organization is to work with advocates in neighborhoods that really can't provide that level of support. That's not to say that we don't work with anyone from the city of New York who's interested in parks and open spaces, but we do have a particular emphasis on supporting, it's generally friends of groups and volunteer stewards that, kind of play in a very small scale the role that some of these nonprofit partners play in specific parks and open spaces. So that's one way we really try to make sure that we are, providing the data and the things that can make it easier for those folks to work with the city and try to understand ways that they can kind of plug into maybe existing streams of either government funding. We also work closely with our Friends at Partnerships for Parks and City Parks Foundation, who do a really great job trying to boost the fundraising capacity of some of these smaller organizations that maybe don't have formal paid staff, but are able to kind of do some of that work because they've been so active in their open spaces. The other point about equity is we're always trying to push the city to make sure that its dollars are going where it's needed, right? When we got the first win of $44 million with Play Fair funding in 2019, we met with parks regularly as they were implementing that funding to ensure that that funding was primarily going to neighborhoods that had been traditionally underserved in terms of maintenance and operations staff, programming. So it's something that, we really try to keep the city accountable. And we meet with them often, and we really try to emphasize that those dollars that are public should be going to neighborhoods that, don't maybe have the level of support from some of the nonprofit partners. That's the beauty of conservancies and alliances. We actually think it's a really wonderful thing for those organizations to exist, because in a lot of ways it frees up the funding that the city would otherwise have to spend. I mean, can you imagine if Central Park had no nonprofit partner? The city of New York would have to spend its entire operating budget and more to keep the park looking as beautiful as it does, right? So having that nonprofit partner has really enabled the city to divert its public dollars where it needs to go most. But we also know that as an agency, they just aren't getting enough to be able to do that work equitably. So that's one of the reasons that we really try to push our decision makers, the mayor, the speaker, our city council members, to ensure that they're sort of lifting the overall budget for the agency, because it's just not enough. So yes, equity is very much on our mind. That's not to say, we're always striving to do better, but I think that's something that, for us is a really driving force of why we do what we do as an organization.
Thanks, Emily. I think Jay Adolph is next, but before, what was I just going to say? Something. Mark Diller, Julian Della Porta and Eric Overton are now attendees. You might elevate them to panelists.
Sure thing. And after Jay, you have Polly Spain.
Okay, Jay, then Polly Spain. And then meanwhile, I think we're going to ask anybody who's an attendee from the community who wants to participate in the discussion, for probably limited to about a minute each, to raise your virtual hand while we talk to Jay and to Polly, and then we'll turn to the community quickly. So Jay, but try to be concise because we got so much time.
I just had a quick question.
Okay, it's fine.
I learned how you advocate for funds for all the parks. How is your organization funded?
We are primarily funded with foundation grants, but also private donations from individual giving. But I would say, and we have some limited corporate sponsorship, primarily through the Daffodil Project. Like Con Edison has been a longtime funder because of the Daffodil Project. But I would say the bulk of our funding is either from individual giving or foundations, like specific grants that we get from various funders.
What's your total budget, Emily?
I'm sorry?
Approximately what's your total budget every year?
That's a great question. I think right now we're at about 1.2 million, if I'm not mistaken.
Do you get any public money?
We don't.
Okay.
We used to, for the Daffodil Project, we used to have some city council members who were longtime, loved that program from its inception, but they've all term limited out. So we do not get public funding as of now.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so Polly, Spain, and Mark, I'm not sure I would see hands up. Maybe I do. I see, maybe that is Ira Gershenhorn with a hand up in the attendees. But first, Polly, Spain, then we'll look at the attendees. Polly? Unmute yourself, Polly, if you are mute. Polly? She's mute. Polly, can you unmute? We're not getting her. Mark, what do we do?
Okay, I got it. All right, got it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say thank you for the wonderful work that you do, Emily. I just find that it's amazing. I wanted to ask you basically about the Bill of Rights that you spoke of. I wanted to find out if that Bill of Rights was created by your organization, and also if there was input from the community, and do you upgrade the Bill of Rights from time to time, to relate to whatever specific community group that you're working with?
That's a really great question, Polly. The Bill of Rights was drafted after a few years of borough-wide meetings that we held every year to solicit input and feedback from our advocates. So I think we started that initiative in 2014, and we held annual meetings and then also checked in with advocates as we had like community events. And we drafted something and put it out to the group of advocates that we work with on a close base. I should say close, folks like Melissa, who's actually a member of your committee, and Melissa. But we have a lot of advocates that we work really closely with who, we put the draft to them to make sure we weren't sort of missing any points. So we tried to have it be reflective of what we have been hearing for years from advocates on the ground in neighborhoods. To your question about whether it's updated, we don't have any plans to update it. I would love that. I don't know if we have the current capacity, but it's a really great suggestion, and I will certainly take it back to my colleagues because I think it could be really nice to have it be more of a living document. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Any other board members with questions? If not,
Stephen Brown has his hand up.
Okay, Stephen, I lost you on my screen. Go ahead.
Hi, Emily. A quick question regarding, I think I heard it a couple times, so you may have mentioned it, but more clarity, with clearly the pandemic and with all the need of parks in and itself to function as a more crucial place. Just curious if there is any thoughts, any things that parks can do, or anything in the future that's helpful, or is the space enough now? But I'm just curious if there's any trends, thoughts, any data just around sort of that, because I have a feeling that we're going to still need parks for the near-term future to
Definitely
serve for people to get out and about and socialize. So
yeah,
just
yeah, that's a really interesting question, Stephen. One of the things that was most concerning to us this past spring, and I think our friends at the Trust for Public Land did research that found that at the height of the shutdown in the city of New York, when playgrounds were closed, courts, there were a lot of park amenities, I think, as we all know, that in the spring were shut off from public access. And it actually meant that for nearly 1 million New Yorkers, they did not have access to open spaces in their communities, because for a lot of neighborhoods, especially in the outer boroughs where you don't have a large flagship park, your only open space is a playground or maybe a basketball court. So when those gates were shut and the locks were put on from March through June, that was a really significant impact that we saw on primarily communities of color, primarily communities that have, lower income levels across the board and are just generally, not getting the kinds of resources that other parts of the city are that tend to be wealthier. So that was really alarming to us and concerning. And we really hope we don't return to that point. And, we've pushed the commissioner and the city to really think about how can we ensure that if things get bad again, which, we're not out of the woods yet with this pandemic, clearly, we want to make sure that those communities are not again losing open space access, because that's, that's just unacceptable to us as an outcome. And we know that parks are so needed. I think the Open Streets program, while it hasn't been a perfect rollout, is an example of, the city trying to think a little more creatively about how can you find additional opportunities, given that it takes a long time to build parks, it takes a lot of funding, there's not a lot of free land. So how can we sort of find these interventions that already exist where we can create more open space for communities that are fairly park poor? So that's something that we've been interested in helping to advocate around and really trying to make the city think through how that can be done more effectively. I think the rollout has been, it hasn't been perfect. I think it's worked better in some neighborhoods than not, but also thinking about like, can schoolyards be opened up for access that maybe aren't currently opened up during off-school hours? So, for us, we're trying to think creatively with some of our public realm organizational peers throughout the city about like how we can kind of think in the long term about some of these open spaces that maybe aren't even in the New York City Parks portfolio, but that could provide open space to New Yorkers. It's a really complicated question, but I think this is a moment for city planners and for the city and for New Yorkers to really think about what the future of New York City open space could and should be. And that's both, better funding the agency itself that maintains the parks that we have, making sure we're not closing down park access for folks who need it, but also thinking about those creative solutions that maybe we hadn't really thought as deeply about, but that could help, play a role moving forward in providing access. But
yeah. Emily, what you just spoke about is certainly not just an issue in underserved communities, but certainly was and continues to be an issue in our community. I mean, there were many among our constituents and board members who thought the Parks Department was counterproductive in keeping the dog runs closed for so long and the basketball courts, et cetera, and would be very unhappy to see them. I see Jeff is paying attention. They're closed again. But
I just want to close with Emily. Just say number and just
sure.
If there is any data or anything like that, I'm super interested. I'm kind of a data junkie.
Let me see what I can find.
I learned something new today. I learned the word park poor, so I'm writing it down. Okay. But it would be interesting, particularly to look at whether it be park poor areas, or particularly from the position of equity.
Yeah.
That. If you break it down to that level, I know you said community board, I'm certainly interested in making sure, or I'm certainly interested in that as well, because we need to make sure that there's open space in all areas. And clearly some people have more parks than others. So, I think it'd be interesting to see that. So thank you.
Yeah, and the one thing I'll briefly add is the forthcoming open space profiles that will be released in the next month or so. We actually did overlay the 20 highest mortality for COVID zip codes in the city. So that is a level of data that's been included in that resource as well. So you can sort of see the correlation. It's not that we have any firm data, but it is something that we wanted to account for given this moment in time. So thank you, Stephen. And I'm happy to find some resources and be in touch.
That's great.
Sorry, the only person from the attendees who raised his or her hand is Ira Gershenhorn. I've promoted him so he can unmute.
Check that with you, but I see that he's now, he's on, is he unmuted? Ira, do you want to ask your question?
I'm unmuted, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Already over time, but it's been worth it, so okay.
One question, why was there no Daffodil Project this past year?
It was a confluence of factors. Number one, a lot of nonprofits in the country, I'm not even going to say New York, we had to cancel our signature Daffodil breakfast event, which is one of our main fundraisers as an organization. That's something I think I forgot to mention actually, Jay, when you asked, we do have a gala each fall and a Daffodil breakfast fundraiser each spring. The Daffodil breakfast had to be canceled, so we lost a lot of funding from that for the program. And we also saw individual giving went down across the board. A lot of foundations shifted their donations to crisis relief. There's, untold crises happening right now. So we both as an organization had less funding to work with, but also we couldn't quite figure out, we're a really small team. We needed more time to figure out the logistics of how to do an event safe or a series of events safely. The Daffodil Project, we have generally about 1,200 folks throughout the 5 boroughs that come to our distribution events to get bulbs. And that's like, spread across the 5 boroughs, but it's like a 3-hour window of time. It's a lot of people in a short amount of time. And we felt like we couldn't do it safely. So I appreciate you asking I am like personally like so deeply committed to bringing it back. That project is my baby. I think Melissa, and I saw Peter in the chat, I love the program and I really want to make sure that we can bring it back for folks because
Thank you very much.
Sorely missed.
I love it too.
You're welcome. I'm so happy to hear that.
Thanks, Ira. So Emily, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you all.
Our having been put together by one of our constituents was a great connection. Yes. And we obviously have the same goal, or I think it's obvious that we have the same goals as you do in your organization. We of course advocate for the parks within our community, but we share the same overall concerns and goals, and getting money to our parks is very much one of our major things we do, and we try to do anyway. So I'm looking forward to being able to work with you on other issues as we go forward.
Likewise.
And I think it's been really useful to have had you make it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I hope you all have a good night. We'll be in touch as we have more info to share, but thank you so much for giving me the space tonight.
Thank you. You're welcome, of course,
Thank
and
you.
your family to stay with us the rest of our discussion tonight. Maybe bedtime for some of them, but thank you.
Yes. All right. Bye.
All right. So next, we have an item to add with, I see Melissa Elstein, who I've never seen in person or semi-person. Hi, Melissa. And Andy Rosenthal, who is well known to our committee as a cycling advocate, and now he's a helicopter guy too. So our second item tonight is going to be a general discussion. And has April Adams joined us yet? I had hoped she'd get here around now, but I haven't seen her on the list. If she does,
I haven't seen her yet.
Make her who's from the Borough President's office. We'll make her an attendee if she does come. So as many people know, including probably many who are in our attendees tonight, our Upper West Side community, and not just, but definitely including users of Riverside Park and Central Park, are driven crazy a lot by tourist helicopters that are now run largely out of, or maybe entirely out of, not New York City, but what they do is they fly over New York City and drive us crazy. And so last month, our transportation committee, with whom this item tonight is joint, we've got Andrew Albert. Andrew, make sure you're not mute, so you'll be a co-chair on this.
I'm not muted.
Okay, and Andrew, and Howard's not here, is he, right now? I don't think
Didn't see his name.
I didn't see his name. So this item's joint with our transportation committee. And last month, the transportation committee proposed to their full board, and the full board adopted a narrow but important resolution. Should have been joint with our committee, but hey, that's history, so we move on. That was addressed to the fact, it turns out that New York City is what's essentially our tourist bureau, has been actually, and thanks to Ken for catching this, has been actually spending our money promoting these tourist helicopter flights. And so last month's resolution was aimed at asking New York City to stop doing that. But we meanwhile had scheduled this discussion here, joint with Transportation Committee, to have a more general overview for our Parks Committee members and our community on what the issues are regarding these helicopters. We're not talking about news helicopters or police helicopters or military helicopters or whatever else. We're talking about tourist helicopters where people pay money to ride over our neighborhood and hang out the windows and take selfies and things. So, and there's pollution too. So we're going to turn it over for a brief presentation by Melissa and or Andy, who are the leaders, as I understand it, of the Stop the Chop organization. It's a wonderful name. If you have slides to show, you're welcome to share the screen. Spend a few minutes giving us the overview, if you would, on the noise, the pollution, the legislation, the limits on legislation, anything you think our community would like to know. And if April Adams is able to join us, she'll add a little more from the point of view of the Borough President's office. And then we'll take—
Clary, if I could just add, this is one of those rare evenings when I actually don't hear any right now.
Well, it's the middle of winter and it's, whatever.
Give it time.
Give it time, right.
Yeah.
All right, Melissa and Andy, take it away.
Well, I think I'm unmuted.
You're unmuted.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Clary, and great to see so many friendly faces. I want to thank Andrew and Mark, and I did know Emily from the Love Your Street Tree Day events that the West 80s Neighborhood Association co-hosts with New Yorkers for Parks. So I'm kind of wearing two hats today with the West 80s Neighborhood Association, which is a 501c3, and we basically started on the Upper West Side regarding the historic districting, and we advocated for the large extended historic district between Broadway, West End, and Riverside, and we specifically wanted the side and the cross streets to be included. And then from there, we got involved with environmental initiatives such as anti-fracking, the street tree beds, and single-use plastic pollution, as well as the pollinator pathways, and we're part of the urban forest initiative with the Nature Conservancy. So a lot of varied topics. And then now we add in the helicopters. So this is our logo, Stop the Chop, and West 80s Neighborhood Association is a part of that coalition. And our first meeting actually was before Andy and I and our new board resurrected Stop the Chop. And we met back in, I'm looking at my notes, at your offices pre-COVID. This was in July of 2019. So the tourist helicopters were starting to bother Upper West Siders and other areas of New York City, even before the pandemic. And they were basically avoiding or going around the 2016 agreement between the city and the downtown heliport, which is where all of the New York City-based tours initiate from. So we started noticing, oh, this is interesting. They're going over Central Park and they're circling around the reservoir, and what's going on, because this wasn't supposed to be allowed. And that's when we discovered that they were flying from New Jersey, as Clary had mentioned. So we had our City Council member Helen Rosenthal, Assembly member Linda Rosenthal, Gail Brewer's office, Congressman Nadler's office, all attending this initial meeting at CB7. And then lo and behold, that fall, there was that tragic crash in the Equitable building, which could have been a lot worse. And then pretty soon thereafter is when Congress members Maloney, Nadler, and Velasquez submitted that introduced HR 4880, the bill to ban non-essential helicopters over densely populated cities. And so we were at that press conference. Mark was there. Remember Mark was there as well, and many others. And after that, we realized, maybe we should or could resurrect the Stop the Chop coalition, which it includes New Jersey and New York. So Andy and I reached out to the former board members because it had gone dormant. After the 2016 agreement, Stop the Chop NYNJ, I think probably felt like they had done all they could do, got burnt out, and they got this agreement that nobody really wanted. It didn't go far enough. And so the organization went dormant. So we started resurrecting it. We do have a new board with one of the original board members on it. And we have a brand new website. So during the pandemic, Andy and I and the rest of the board spent that time to create a very thorough website. So I guess that would be our PowerPoint. We look at the website. We have just a plethora of information from that federal legislation that I mentioned, as well as local legislation, which is just dormant. There's really been nothing introduced yet locally in 2021. And then we have some legislation on the New Jersey state side as well. And then if you look, you can see who the board members are. You can see a whole host of articles. We have a page on the environmental problems. And oh, thank you, Mark. It's so fancy. Yes, this is what we were kind of hoping would happen. So we have, if you go up to the tabs, Mark, you can see under About, and you click the little, there we go. If you go under our coalition, you'll see all of the electeds over the years that have been in support of, some of them before there was this federal legislation. And then we have organizations in support. And I was hoping Emily would have stayed on the call to thank her, because New Yorkers for Parks is one of those organizations. And Central Park Conservancy recently tweeted that they were supporting as well. We are waiting to hear back from Riverside Park Conservancy. And I know they're speaking tonight after us. So maybe that's another ask that one of you could suggest that they also join in, because the helicopters are flying over Riverside Park on their way to Central Park and then elsewhere throughout the city. So we, and Andy will talk, in more detail as well, but we wanted to make our website one of these go-to places where if you had any questions about, the health, the safety, we would put all those studies on that area. So Mark, you could always go into About. We have a page that's called Safety and Terrorism, where we list all the New York City crashes, because it's not just environmental problems, but it's also the crashes, the loss to real estate, to lives. I should put lives first and then real estate. And who's to say that these helicopters couldn't be hijacked as well? The security doesn't seem to be as thorough as it is in regular airports rather than heliports. And then if you go back up to About, we have another page that links environmental and health. And one of our wish lists right now, we are linking a lot of studies, hyperlinking and articles. We do have a wish list, if you keep scrolling down, to create a synopsis of all of those. But that's going to take a little bit of time. That's next on our list. So we're in the process of creating a very large coalition of community groups, environmental organizations, community boards, noise pollution groups, health groups, government officials, you name it. Anyone who's affected, we want them to join on, because this has to be a grassroots effort, because we're going up against the industry. We're going up against the FAA to a certain extent. We have to push them to make these regulatory changes. And that is kind of like a David and Goliath fight. So we have a petition, and we have on our card, you can always scan, I think my fingers, there we go. If you scan our cards, that takes you to our website and to the petition. So that's how we're, especially during the pandemic, that's how we've been doing most of our community organizing, is focusing on the petition and then communicating with petition signers there. We're doing less, tabling like we did during the historic, the fight to preserve West End Avenue and the surrounding areas. We really haven't been doing any tabling during the pandemic. So that's my overview, and I'm going to hand it over to Andy now.
Okay.
Hey, Andy, just hold off one moment, if you would.
Sure.
First of all, I see that John Harold, who's the administrator of Riverside Park, has joined us. So, Mark, I want to make sure John is an attendee. And John, I'm not sure if you were with us a couple moments ago when Melissa mentioned that all of the Central Park Conservancy has joined the effort, including supporting the proposed federal legislation. That thus far, the Riverside Park Conservancy hasn't. So we wanted to ask you, to speak to Dan and focus on that. The CB7 about a year ago, I think, has a resolution from our full boards supporting the Nadler, et cetera, proposed federal legislation. However, somebody just put in the chat, and maybe you and Andy can talk about that would propose to regulate flights only below 1,500 feet, and that these flights now are going like 1,600 to 2,000 square feet, feet above or whatever. So maybe you can address that a little bit too. But Andy, why don't you tell us what you'd like to? And
yeah, I think there's a little bit of confusion. So because tonight is supposed to be sort of helicopter 101 to give you guys background data. And this has been a multi-decade battle between the citizens of New York and a few special interests. And over time, progress has been made, whether it's closing the heliport at the Pan Am building. So many of you are old enough to remember that was the first disaster from the helicopter industry in New York City, with several fatalities, to the present time where we're still battling. And today we were on the phone with Congressman Nadler's staff. So the battle's not over. There have been some victories. Let's go back to 2015. The city council was working on a bill in 2015 to terminate the tourist industry leases at the downtown heliport. At present time, in 2015 and today, all of the New York-based tourist helicopters come out of the downtown heliport by the seaport. They're not allowed to run tourist flights out of the two other New York City-based heliports, which is the West 30th Street and the East 34th Street. Those are only for police, military, commuter, and charter. Okay, so let me also, for those of you, and I think Steve Brown, this is for you, as a data junkie, you were just asking for some data. to give you some numbers. So prior to the 2015 bill, when the city council was getting ready to terminate the lease for the downtown heliport, there were 60,000 tourist flights per annum. 60,000. Pull out your calculator and you start to realize that during the daylight hours, that's every few minutes, there was a tourist flight taking off and landing and disturbing the citizens in New York. Most of those were coming up the Hudson River and turning around at the 79th Street Boat Basin. So as the city council was preparing to shut down that heliport, the mayor reached what he thought was a good compromise and cut the flights out of the tourist flights that were flying out of downtown from 60,000 to 30,000, and to also give the citizens in New York one day off. Sundays were going to be flight free. And that agreement has been inked. And to my belief, the tourist industry based in the South Street has been abiding by that. The other thing it said is they would not fly over land. So they were not permitted to take off from the downtown heliport and fly over any of the parks, Riverside or Central Park. Okay, and I do believe that they've been living by the letter of that law. There's still a problem in my mind, but they at least have been abiding by that. 30,000 is still an enormous number of tourist helicopters. There are also about 15, 16, 17,000 from the last data I have, commuter and other charter flights that leave out of the two Midtown heliports. Okay, so to frame the issue, we still have about 60 to 70,000 flights that are leaving out of New York-based heliports that, according to the Jerry Nadler bill, are non-essential. And I think it's important as we have this discussion, different people have different definitions of non-essential. So the Nadler bill 4880, the Nadler-Maloney-Velasquez bill that was tabled in 2019 defines non-essential as, you know, it would eliminate all of the tourists are non-essential, as well as the commuter and charter are non-essential. It would still allow news, military, police, and emergency, like people having transplants and things like that, that sometimes come in by helicopter. So that is the bill that stopped the chop, or the type of language that we are supporting, which would give relief to everybody that's complaining now, pretty much, almost everybody. Yes, there would be days when the police are flying, but that's a very small fraction of the problem. Something I want to also, as part of this 101 is, many people, I think a lot of people we talk to, think that the problem is mostly news and police. And while they do fly, they are not the majority of the problem. There is an app which I would recommend to you, and we could put it, Melissa, can you start in the chat or I'll put it in the chat, called Flight Radar 24. There's actually 2 or 3 of these similar apps, but it's the one I use, Melissa uses, we like it a lot. It's a free app, and you pull it up, it's like Google Maps, you get a map of where you are, and it has little icons for things that are flying above you. And you just tap on them and it'll tell you statistics about them. You know, what the tail number is, it can give you the flight path, it'll give you the altitude and the speed if you want all that data. So that's very useful.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Does it give you the place of origin of those flights?
Usually not always, and sometimes it's cryptic. So it's not always the origin is not, you can usually see it because it has a colored line. So once you tap your finger on that icon, you can follow the line back to where it's sourced. And usually from that, and right now you'll see that they're all pointing to Kearny, New Jersey, which is a privately owned airfield where Fly on New York is operating out of. But you'll also see some of those that are commuter coming out of the West 30th Street heliport or whatnot. So it gives you an idea of what they are and where they're headed. Okay, so that's something that's important. We are encouraging people to file 311 complaints because the industry, when you speak to them and when they meet with our electeds, they say, well, there's only, you know, X number of people that are bothered by this. It's a very small number. And in fact, it isn't a small number. It's just most people don't bother to call 311, or after 2 decades of calling 311, they've stopped calling 311 or going online. There is a special helicopter complaint form. We have a link on our website under Take Action for that. So that's also something you can do. What are we trying to do going forward? How are we going to solve this problem? This problem, unlike the problem we had just the presentation before, we can fix this problem with no money. Most of our problems that come before us these days require lots of money. This is a problem that can be fixed with no money, really, right? So it is fixable, and we do seem to have the vast, vast majority of our electeds behind it. Why hasn't it happened? Well, we haven't, the mayor, after the crash in Times Square, the Equitable building 18 months ago, did come out and say we shouldn't have non-essential helicopters, but he hasn't done anything. So he may be on our side, but he hasn't taken action. We believe that he could terminate the leases for the 2 city-owned heliports, okay? The downtown heliport, which is where all of the New York-based tourist helicopters come out of, is on a lease with the EDC, which is controlled by the mayor and or the city council. So that could be terminated with 30 days notice. We've been waiting and asking him to do that, he hasn't. Similarly, the East 34th Street heliport is on city-owned land and could be terminated. The West 30th is a little bit more complicated because that's in Hudson River Park Trust. When the trust was formed and that park was formed, the heliport was supposed to close. It operated illegally for a number of years. And then about a decade ago, there was a law passed to sort of, after the fact, make it legal again under certain provisions. Okay, so that is a little bit more complicated, but I believe that the board of the trust is majority appointed by the mayor and the borough president. There's some by the governor, some by the mayor, and some by the borough president. But the combination of the mayor and the borough president do control a majority. We hope to put pressure through our coalition on those people to get rid of that heliport. So those are the issues. And what I haven't focused on, which is probably what's driving most people nuts lately, are the New Jersey-based helicopters. And unfortunately, once you get 1 inch above the ground, the city has no control over what happens above ground, really, as for helicopters or other things that fly that don't take off from city-owned airports. And that's the case with most of these things that are hovering over the parks today, come out of New Jersey. And so they also bother people from New Jersey. As part of our coalition, we have people on the Jersey coastline in Jersey City, Hoboken, Weehawken, and things like that. But they also don't control it. It's an FAA issue, which is why I call the federal bill or something like it the Holy Grail. And that's really something along the lines of HR 4880, which we're told they're going to reintroduce in the next couple of months. That is what we're pushing for. There are other bills that could help. So I said the city can terminate. The state of New Jersey also has some bills in the state Senate that have been advanced in the last year, to one to curtail and one to terminate those flights. But at this point in time, we don't know how much traction. We're just building up our coalition in New Jersey. So I'll stop there, I think, and answer questions. But that's sort of, I think, frames the problem a little bit and tells you what we're trying to do to solve it.
Thanks, Andy and Melissa. I wanted to start with a couple questions, and then we'll take from anybody else who's got them. We still have a few minutes for this one, or we're not totally constrained by time. Andy, I'm confused, or I think I'm confused by what you said about did you say there's still 30,000 out of the downtown Manhattan heliport that is owned by the city,
yes,
that are largely complying with the 2016 agreement that there would be no Sunday flights and whatever else was in that agreement. So you got 30,000 a year still out of there.
Well, yeah, except for in 2020 with COVID, we got only a small fraction of that. So that's virtually shut down temporarily, but I'm sure it will come back next year.
Because on the other hand, what we were hearing more, I thought was really the focus now was having learned that they can't do totally what they want to do if they're taken off from New York City property, that they were largely going out of New Jersey. And what we don't have April here, and one or the other of you may talk a little bit, if you want, about the borough president's task force. I was at that most recent meeting, and I think both of you were as well, and some of our other, and Andrew, I think some of our other members. What was really coming across at that meeting was the notion that there's actually an increase with all these sort of millennials or whatever in New York who've got money but nowhere to go because of COVID restrictions. They're going over to New Jersey and taking these helicopter flights with an increase in those, and they're all coming over and hovering over Central Park and Riverside Park and taking selfies. That may be oversimplified, but is the problem the still what was 30,000 and maybe 30,000 or more again out of the downtown heliport, plus this whole migration to New Jersey? Is it are they both?
Yeah, it's both. So the
both problematic.
migration started, as I was mentioning, even before COVID, right? Because the helicopter industry was realizing that they, as long as they were taking off from downtown, they were a party to that 2016 agreement. So some of those same companies would move their operations on Sundays or off hours and ignore the spirit of that agreement to fly overland and to fly in those off hours and including on Sundays. So right now, yes, because of coronavirus, we don't have as many flights going out of the downtown heliport, but once the virus is over, that heliport will go back to being fully operational. And so we're going to have both. It's probably going to be magnified. We're going to have both the companies flying from New Jersey, not a party to any agreement, plus we'll have the ones downtown. And those flight patterns downtown bother a different group of citizens, right? Because they're going to fly along the coastlines, and you'll see more complaints will increase down also by Governor's Island and down by the Brooklyn Bridge, even though we have a lot of people complaining about the fly-in on flights going next to the Brooklyn Bridge as they leave uptown, going downtown. And then we're also going to have something that I don't know if Andy mentioned, but the commuter flights, they're going to increase again. Right now, there's a plan from Blade Commuter Company. They're going public. They are generally based out of the West 30th Street heliport, though they also have a heliport at the East 34th Street. And there was an article released, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, that they're expanding to the Westchester County Airport to encourage, I guess, the wealthy corporate commuter to basically fly from Westchester into Manhattan rather than taking public transportation or driving. And so that is expected to start in March. So what's interesting and what's horrifying is that all of these complaints that have skyrocketed during the pandemic are going to be the tip of the iceberg once we have the full expanse of commuter charter helicopters plus the downtown heliport back in business. I can't even imagine the din and the numbers that we're going to see. It's quite scary, actually. So that's the lay of the land at the moment.
Yeah, and then just to clarify one more.
Go ahead, Andy.
Go ahead, Andy.
To clarify one more thing. Yes, the tourist helicopters are a lot of the problem. Those things hovering over the reservoir today are tourist helicopters from New Jersey. But if we go back before the New Jersey helicopters became an issue, we had interruptions at the Delacorte performances, and those were not tourist helicopters. Those were Hampton-headed, copters coming out of the West 30th Street heliport, going to the Hamptons for the most part, or the airport. So this is a problem where the commuter people are trying to point the finger solely at the tourist industry and say, it's not us, it's those bad guys from New Jersey. That's not totally true. Yes, right. There's an element to that, but let's not let them deflect the blame. They were a problem and continue to be a problem because their helicopters are enormously loud. They use bigger, more powerful helicopters for those flights, and they're very loud. Yes, they go over very quickly relative to the tourists who seem to linger, but let's not let them off the hook. So, and there are different proposals. So, Gail Brewer's office, is April here yet?
I don't think so.
Okay, Gail had the task force. You asked about that, Clary, yeah. Which we all attended. Gail seems focused mostly on the tourist helicopters, which are a huge problem without a doubt, but they are not the only problem. So just, we need to make her aware that there are two parts of this problem. And let's not forget about the commuter helicopters, which are ramping up, like Melissa said, with this new Westchester route. They're hoping to have a commuter service. You buy a pass, you go every day to and from the office on your helicopter. So,
well, that's assuming people are going back to their offices. But
yeah, well,
at some point they will. At some point, there will be, the pandemic will be over, and they're trying to encourage, you know, these $175 per flight commutes. So,
Andrew, did you want to? I wanted to clarify something here to put things together, but you want to go first, Andrew?
I just wanted to say that when the screen showed under the about all of the elected officials that were helping you out, it was a really wide geographic spread from all different parts of Queens and Manhattan and even Hudson County, New Jersey. Is there support among this large amount of elected officials for federal support to stop this amazing din we're going to have and pollution and just terrible mess over our residential and park areas?
Yeah, I mean, we're building that together. We're weaving it together. Part of the success of the helicopter industry has been to fragment the opposition. So they use a variety of techniques, and you know, everyone's been separate. So there is a very active vocal group in Whitestone, Queens, which is under the route that heads out to the Hamptons, right? And so they—
And a stone's throw from LaGuardia Airport too.
Yes, yes. And that, if you use your Flight Radar app, you'll see that the Hamptons routes traditionally go right over LaGuardia and then head out over the Whitestone area, and then they get over water and stay over water till they get pretty far out to the Hamptons.
So this raises an issue, which is that you showed us in the chat, and Margaret, Melissa mentioned the app, the Flight Radar 24 app. If you can see who is flying these various aircraft that may be violating the law, is anybody going after them?
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the law, because I saw something in the chat and there is a little confusion. Jerry Nadler co-sponsored a bill last week that came out of the Hawaii delegation. And so that is not 4880 in that language with the various height restrictions. Is not. 4880 would ban them, as his aide said today, up to space. So it would cover New York very well at all altitudes. It would eliminate these non-essential helicopter flights. But that has to be federal legislation. Yes, there is another bill. The Hawaii bill would actually enable us to do some control locally that the FAA has superseded or prohibited in the past. That would be helpful. That bill is great too. I would support that, but that's not the same holy grail.
Right.
Then that answered actually the question that I was about to ask about the height limit thing in the chat. Let's look to other community board joint committee and other community board members, and then we'll turn to the public. I will suggest that people in the public who are with us as attendees, start putting your virtual hands up, but let's see who we've got. Susan Schwartz first.
I'm just curious what you would do about the film industry.
I believe that would be allowed. I don't think there's a ban on that. Melissa, do you know what the language on 4880? It doesn't really speak to it in the definition.
And it doesn't seem like that's been a huge issue. Now, you're not including the tourist photography flights, correct?
No, of course not. No, I'm just discussing, the film industry. A lot of
right, because people are saying that Flying On is using a photography aerial loophole in order to be flying what they're claiming are like professional photographers, but they're really just, Instagrammers. And we put on our Twitter account today, please follow us on Twitter. We're pretty active and people are very vocal and on Twitter. So we reposted a video from TikTok of some people who are flying with their legs out in a helicopter, another helicopter going around the World Trade Center area. And it's astounding that this is allowed. And, we did see an article, I have this article here from July 18, 2019, the Daily News, that said that Senator Schumer and Gillibrand were investigating those such flights but we have not heard anything about that investigation, the result of it. If anyone knows, we are curious about that, because how is this continually being allowed to happen? This was the company that crashed into the East River and the tourists were trapped in their harnesses. It's that same company. And then I also read that New York Attorney General Tish James is investigating that company for business practices. But again, we don't know the status of that. We would like to. So this is all.
Susan, do you think that movie shoots should be banned?
I'm just curious what your view is on it.
Yeah, we're supporting the federal legislation right now. That's our main goal. And I think that would give people a, not 100% reduction, but a 90%. I think real true film companies, I have no idea, but my guess is they're less than 1% of what the problem is. So, because
certainly the film industry brings a lot of money to New York City. So, when you mentioned before what was allowed, you said news, medical transport, and a couple of things. You did not mention the film industry. That's an important part of New York's revenue base.
Yeah, although I doubt those helicopters, also the news are flying out of Linden. So they probably really technically add no revenue to the city because they're not paying taxes here. They don't fly out.
That's completely not true. They're actually, they fly from East 34th Street and the west side as well.
I'm not familiar. So you know more about the film business than I do. We're not taking a stand on the film business. We're going to stand behind Jerry Nadler's bill, which I think permits it, but I'll go back and look at the language.
Yes. I think we really need to focus on what's the biggest problem, which are the tourists, photography, helicopters, and the commuters.
I think there'd be collateral damage in terms of the film industry. That's all. It's really important.
Yeah, well, I know we allow news, so I just don't know.
I don't believe, because that also might go under the First Amendment, but that would be a question to email, Congressman Nadler and Maloney's office for sure. So we can email.
We'll try and get that
answer. You may know that we have, the community board has also spoken in favor of doing away with some of the traffic helicopters and installing cameras along the highways. That might not be for an accident, but it would be for the traffic level that is always reported on all the news. If that's something we are advocating for as well.
Yes, that on the helicopter task force, I think that was brought up. And yeah, that, again, we have to focus our energies on what our mission is. And so even though it may be, it is something that is potentially an issue, we're focusing on the commuters, the tourists, the photography, and staying away from the First Amendment issues of the media. But certainly other organizations can work with the city and those companies to change those practices if need be.
Melissa, I looked really quickly at your list of political support from all over the area, like I mentioned. Linden is in Union County, I believe. Do you have any Union County folks on that list?
I don't think so. So
nobody we've been in contact with recently.
We have a wonderful city council member in Hoboken who is also on the Gail Brewer task force, who's been very helpful in New Jersey. But we are looking for more New Jersey community volunteers. So if anyone has friends who would like to volunteer with us, and especially now during COVID, it's been really hard. We're not going to be traveling there and flyering the way we can do a little bit here in New York City. So please let us know. We are looking to expand into the community in New Jersey.
And we've heard that Mayor Stephen Fulop of Jersey City is also well aware of the problem, and that some actually do originate.
Horrendous problem because over there.
We need to keep moving a bit on this one.
Okay, can I wrap up with just things that you can do?
Wait, hold on a second, Andy, because I do want to make sure a couple more people, Cindy, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. Cindy Cardinal, Helen Rosenthal, Council Member Rosenthal's Chief of Staff, seems to have had her hand up for a long time. Cindy, did you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that in addition to the other legislation that's been mentioned, there is also a bill pending that Councilmember Rosenthal has signed on to that would prohibit chartered helicopters from taking off and landing at heliports owned by the city if the helicopters don't meet the stage 3 noise levels for helicopters as determined by the Federal Airport Noise and Capacity Act. So that it's meant to try to address some of the noise. And if you'd like, I can put a link to the legislation in the chat.
Sure.
Yes,
Just another bit of information.
Cindy, isn't that essentially the legislation that was proposed and very much supported by our neighborhood and many council people in 2016? I mean, I testified for Community Board 7 with regard to what it was designed to do, is because of the noise of helicopters and requiring the latest version, which were not then commercially in use, to essentially get rid of tourist flights on the noise of the equipment. But wasn't that essentially swept aside by the 2016 deal? I mean, is this different from that?
Honestly, that predates me by a lot, but yeah, I will say that the history.
This is a very limited ban and would not solve the majority of problems that we're currently having. So it would be helpful in a very microscopic way, but is not going to solve the problem, because even the most modern helicopters today are extraordinarily noisy. So we are not at the point where it exists in this country, a silent or quiet helicopter.
Thanks, Andy. Let's quickly take Jay and then Ken. I do not see any hands up among attendees, but if we
Natasha Kazmi has had her hand up a while too.
Okay, let's go Jay, Ken, Natasha. Jay?
Just a quick question. Pre-pandemic, do we know how much revenue the city derived from their leases, et cetera, from these helicopters?
Yeah, we have a variety of data points. It's a couple of $1 million for the downtown, less than $2 million for the downtown heliport, which is where the 30,000 tourist helicopters go. And the city is responsible for maintaining that pier, which is pretty sizable and expensive. So a large portion of that money comes in and then goes out to maintain the heliport. The Midtown heliports, the last numbers I saw were less than $1 million, Jay. I want to say, I think around $800,000. So, you know, given the damage.
So it's barely a rounding error.
It's pennies. It's certainly not worth.
Thanks.
And as we were talking about earlier, we're looking for all sorts of a creative new open space to be parking space. So maybe we've got some candidates there. Ken, then Natasha.
Yeah. Hi, Melissa and Andy. We are the Parks and Environment Committee. I think in this era when we're trying to do everything that we can to reduce carbon emissions throughout the world, to have New York City have 70 to 80,000 unnecessary helicopter trips a year just makes absolutely no sense. I'm wondering, a question is, given that we now have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic president, obviously the Nadler bill was not going to go too far in the earlier Senate. What do you think the prospects are? Can Nadler perhaps slip this into maybe the next COVID relief bill? And what's your sense about how hard he's willing to fight for this?
I think that that's a great point. And about the environmental aspect of it, I have an article by an aviation expert who is saying that it takes 16 gallons of fuel to travel, for example, 58 miles by a helicopter, whereas a large van, only burns 5 gallons. So there's quite that difference. And he's saying that the increase of helicopters, the helicopter manufacturing companies are pushing for an increase of, yes, electric down the road, but right now they're fossil fuel based. And he's saying that this is a detrimental effect on the environment as the level of gaseous emissions from helicopter engines increase, as well as the increase in aircraft noise. With regard to your question about Congressman Nadler, I think that is better for him and his community liaison to answer, and we would not like to speak on his behalf.
Okay.
Natasha, and then we'll wrap up. I allowed a little extra time on this one because we were hoping to be joined by a representative of the 24th precinct for our next item, but as far as I can tell, Detective McDonald has not joined us, so we've gone a little over on this one, but Natasha.
Yeah, I was wondering if Andy or Melissa could talk a little bit more about the rationale behind terminating the leases of the 2 downtown helicopters that they mentioned. These are 2 heliports. I'm just worried about lateral damage, for lack of a better word, whether it's either the film industry or like, emergency news, medical, those kinds of helicopters. When you are saying that your main concern is the tourist traffic, why can't we approach it some other way, like, trying to put some restriction on flight paths or time of day, days of week, noise levels, etc. But like terminating 2 leases sounds a little bit radical to me.
Well, Natasha, as I said earlier, we do not propose any limits whatsoever on military, news, or emergency helicopters. So those things that you mentioned.
Yeah, but if the leases are terminated, then nothing would be able to fly there, right?
No.
No. The other things would be able to fly there. Just the private tourist businesses would lose their license.
Oh, so it would be, okay, fine.
Or the charter flight operators like Blade and Uber. Blade and Uber would no longer have the right to land there.
Okay.
Or take off.
Or take off.
Right. All right. I just want to make one more comment on the Nadler bill. I think it's great that you're supporting that, and as a matter of fact, so is Community Board 7 supporting the Nadler bill. So we've already got policy on that, and we're not looking to do any new resolution tonight. But it does seem to me with the Nadler bill that there's a considerably better shot at getting it passed with regard to the tourist flights than the commuter flights, because you've got a lot of big money who make substantial campaign contributions, who are part of or a lot probably of the population that wants to get to their job by commuter helicopter flight. I would be thrilled if we could just get rid of the tourist flights, although getting rid of the commuter flights I think would be great for our neighborhood too. It just seems to be a bigger reach. But
I think the Nadler legislation may get a new lease on life with the new administration, really.
Yeah. All right, if we don't have anything else on this one, and I do not see and have not seen any attendee with their hands up, somebody help me, are we missing anything there?
I don't see anything. And,
okay.
And April
is so just to close, please, when you do see Jerry or communicate with him, make sure he knows you care about this issue. All your electeds, really, they need to hear from everybody. That's what's going to move this forward.
Thank you, Melissa and Andy and Melissa. We've been delighted to have you stay with us for the rest of the meeting. And we are going to now turn to our special guest, John Harold, who's the administrator of Riverside Park, for our next item. So our next item is really starting to talk about something that actually occurred to me because my husband asked me about a week ago or couple weeks ago, hey, are there any security cameras in Riverside Park, as we were talking about some of the latest incidents of vandalism, and realized basically no. So I asked John to start a discussion with us tonight. What has really precipitated this is, and all of us see different aspects of the park. We may be aware of different vandalism incidents, different crimes, but 3 that immediately came to mind that were all very, very recent. One was the 2 robberies at Knife Point at 74th Street and Riverside Drive. It turned out to be 2 kids who were eventually apprehended. But boy, that is our neighborhood and that's our park. The second thing was this, and you may have read about, many of you may have read about the graffiti person who has been painting graffiti all over the park, on stone, on trees, on sidewalks. And it's a tremendous, tremendous responsibility for Jeff and his staff to try to get that stuff erased and the surfaces restored. And then the third thing was, there's always a certain amount of vandalism, and it is vandalism, where there are barriers put on, particularly thinking of the Esplanade, that are intended to divert cyclists onto the Rosenthal bypass or wherever. And sometimes those are moved, and that's vandalism. And but in the last couple of weeks, what happened was 2 sets of barriers at 72nd Street. There's a set of 4 components, 4 pieces of 4 barrier pieces, and then another 4 a little bit north, but all basically at 72nd Street. They were all vandalized and thrown into the river. Jeff then replaced them. And within a couple of days, most of those new replacements, these are big metal things, were thrown into the river. So you've got 3 very diverse sets of crimes, all very recently. And that really got me at least thinking about, wait a minute, should we be talking about security cameras for Riverside Park? So John and I had a little bit of a preliminary discussion that was very useful last week. And I'm going to turn it over to John. But John, sort of in general, I think we'd like to hear about, sort of Parks Department policy about security cameras, about the mechanics of installing them, about the interagency issues of, who would do it, how they get monitored, about money. But I want to turn it over to John first to speak with us, and then we'll have questions, and we'll turn to the community as well. John, you're on.
Hello, well, nice to see you all. Thank you, Clary, for the introduction. Yeah, all year we've been having a terrible problem with graffiti, which wasn't just this one particular individual, although he or she, whoever it may be, has certainly taken a toll on us this fall, or what are we, fall, winter. And I do know that both the 20th and the 24th precinct are putting a great deal of energy and effort into trying to put an end to it. To really answer your question about cameras, it's not really something I can have a conversation about, but I can say that they are a tool. They can be useful in certain situations. They're not a, they're not a catch-all, one-size-fits-all. And there are others who know more about it than I, and it's certainly something that can be considered by the police, could be considered by parks. But I think it would be premature for me to start talking about, let's use them to address graffiti, or let's use them to address anything specific. I do appreciate the suggestion and the idea, and it's something that we can look at. But it would be a decision that would be made carefully, and also if it were felt that it was really going to help.
John, I think that no matter where and how many security cameras there might be in Riverside Park, we all know that they wouldn't necessarily happen to catch every act of criminal vandalism. But it would seem that the more there are and the more thoughtfully placed, the more likely they would be to help, although not catch everything. Let me be a little more specific with a couple of questions to focus the discussion. I think you said to me the other day that in terms of policy, there's no Parks Department policy that would prohibit or oppose security cameras in the parks. Is that correct?
For specific, like I said, tailored to specific circumstances. Parks has used them as a way to address specific circumstances. The idea that they would just be used anywhere is not department policy, but they could be used specifically for specific reasons.
And what about the sort of existing infrastructure? To the extent that cameras are installed, and this may be premature even to talk about the mechanics on this, but we would not be facing being told, oh, they'd have to be hardwired into existing electric connections, for instance. That is not the case, is it? Or if you know.
You're asking me?
Yeah, if you know.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe somebody else.
The state of the technology, I could imagine that they're solar powered or something, but I'm purely imagining that. I don't know the current technology.
Battery. Well, why don't we talk about this with our committee members, our non-committee board members, whoever else we have from our electeds, and our community as well. Let's start with committee members who want to ask or talk about or say something or ask something. Put up your hands. I'd like to see some.
See Barbara?
Oh, Barbara Adler. Yes, please.
Hi, thanks, Laurie. John, there are areas in Riverside Park where there's long stretches like between 97th and 125th Street where once you're there, there's no access. And if not a security camera, then how about something like those blue phones that the college campuses have that go directly to 911 so that, you know, in case of emergency or if you're accosted or something and you're familiar with the route, you know where to go to get it, you know, and it just seems like it makes sense.
Barbara, you're talking about the Cherry Walk down at the river.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I know we do have some of those phones in the park. We have them at Hippo Playground, for example, and Dinosaur Playground, and 105th Street on the Promenade. And then we have them at West Harlem Piers Park and north of there. Cherry Walk is an interesting idea. They are installed by the police, actually. We occasionally can fund them as part of a project, just as we can fund DOT lighting as part of a project, but they're part of the police system. And something that can be considered.
Thank you.
Other committee members who would like to?
Natasha has her hand up.
I'm losing.
Hi. Yeah, I was wondering.
Oh,
if,
Natasha. Okay. Go ahead, Natasha.
Yes, I was wondering if all these incidents of criminal vandalism or criminal activity, if this has gone up since the personnel shortages at Riverside Park because of the pandemic, budget cuts. Do you think there's a correlation there?
The graffiti increased for reasons unknown. I mean, it started really last summer. One could certainly imagine a connection with everything that's going on in society right now. But no, it's not the result of budget cuts. It's something people are doing to us. So it's not a result of our not having the resources. It's a huge burden on our resources to keep up with it. It's a huge job to keep removing it constantly. But the fact of it happening is an external factor. It's not something resulting from anything at parks.
I guess my point was that as a result of the budget cuts and the personnel cuts, if there are fewer eyes around in the park, maybe there's more opportunity for people to get up to mischief if they want to.
John, do you think most of it's done at night when it's dark?
It could be done at night. It could be done after school in the late afternoons. Weekends, it's really hard to tell because there's no one time that it's done as far as I've observed. And we tend to see it pretty quickly. To your question of observing the graffiti when it happens, it's never been the case that it's like littering. You rarely see the person littering. You just see the litter afterward. It's kind of like that. I don't think a lack of presence is leading to it. As I say, our biggest challenge is just removing it because there's so much of it. That's the real problem for us.
That's on the graffiti.
Correct.
What about other stuff? I mean, for instance, what my husband and I personally observed, which is finding these sets of big metal barriers at 72nd Street that are there for a very good reason of directing cyclists to the cycling route. You know, day one, we find 7 out of 8 sections in the river. Jeff put some new ones there, and 2 days later, most of those new sections in the river. Is that an indication of what you see as a new level of crime?
I perceive that to be probably an individual who is determined to perhaps ride a bike up the Esplanade, or for some reason doesn't want the barricades there. I don't see it as a broad society thing. I think it's one individual doing this, and might be doing it under any circumstances.
Other committee members?
You have Polly Spain.
You have Polly, I see Polly's hand is up. Yep.
And Peter Frischoff from attendees. And then if you have time, I have a question.
Of course. Polly.
Right, so I was just listening. I know that Riverside Park is very dark because I've taken the bus and gotten off on 94th Street over there. It's very dark, very desolate, especially in the evening. And I know you mentioned lighting, but what about some kind of alarm system that is tied to the police, where they have like a map or a signal where someone can push a button, or, you know, loud sound comes out, you know, because there are robberies over there. I mean, I personally wouldn't walk over there at night myself, to be honest with you, because it is poorly lit and very desolate over there in that area. But for those who have to take the bus and they want to get off to go home, you know, I think there should be something there, like a button, you know, just to tie it into the station area over there, so that this way someone can get help. Because even if you have cameras, who's going to monitor the cameras? You know, I just think that it would be better if there was some kind of button that somebody could push where there's like a signal and maybe a loud voice or something, you know, to alert that something's going on.
You're talking about getting off by Joan of Arc.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And are you
well, not only Joan of Arc, I know I've gotten off at 94th Street over there, like on the bus. Yep. And it's really dark and desolate, and to me, kind of scary, to be honest with you, because no one's around, you know, if I needed help. Mm-hmm. So, and then you have to cross and wait for the cars to go by. It's kind of like a highway, sort of, you know, a lot of traffic during the daytime, but at night, I'm quite sure there's not that much traffic. So if somebody's walking home, you know, from work or the hospital, whatever, I think it's the M5, I think stops over there. Yes. You know, I just feel that, you know, for those who are in the park, it would be kind of difficult to get help, even if you had cameras in the park. So I just think along certain routes on an avenue that there should be some kind of box where you can push an alarm and a loud voice comes out, you know, shouting, you know, help, as opposed to camera system.
I'll add something on that after John, if you want to say something in response to that.
That's an interesting idea. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've seen them on something like that on the kiosks that are on the streets, the charging kiosks, the information kiosks. My knowledge, it's not something we've looked at in parks, but it's an interesting idea. And as far as lighting, it's we can ask DOT to make sure that it's up to standard there.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add on that, and I think Doug Kleiman put something in the chat a little while ago, is in terms of reaching the police, most of us have cell phones, which are probably a faster and maybe more reliable way to get to 911 than relying on what we currently don't have, which is some kind of a push button piece of what we call street furniture, but if such things were possible to be installed. But somebody said something about how you would monitor the cameras if there were cameras. And I think it's not just the question of, and would not necessarily expect somebody to be watching all day what every camera shows. They are useful to some extent, I think, although this needs to be studied as a deterrent. If people know there are a lot of cameras around, they are a deterrent to crime. And second, they're certainly useful in helping to solve crimes. So that if you know an incident has happened and you have a security camera where you've got footage you can then choose to look at, I think it's much more about that than it is anything about having any person or even an artificial person watching what they show all day. Stephen Brown, our big boss, our new big boss, Stephen.
How about that? Well, this will be flattery then, because I just wanted to make the same point Clary made, that I think cameras can be a deterrent, and they're also useful for solving crimes. And you sort of said these are things you would look at, but I think it would certainly be something worth looking at, some type of program to test certain areas. But again, I think they largely work as a deterrent for sort of known people that are consistently coming back. They figure out where the cameras are pretty quickly. So if there's hot spots, and then I just think of, the future building of all the construction on the rotunda. Construction sites generally sometimes get people looking for things and playing around in there, and maybe there's an opportunity there as well. But I kind of think about that future project, and maybe something to think about as well.
Yeah, and I mean, certainly in my view, following up on what John said a little while ago about who he suspects is tossing all of those barriers aimed to have cyclists follow the designated cycling route at 72nd Street and also at 83rd. If you're talking about placing cameras in selected locations that are aimed to both deter and allow crime solving, those are examples, as well as near the rotunda when the work is being done, and perhaps where Polly has identified some rather dark and creepy areas. And I think it's not difficult to come up with a selection of appropriate locations if the rest of the program fell into place that would be designed to maximize the usefulness of cameras without necessarily covering the park with cameras. Stephen, your hand is still up. Did you want to say something else?
I'm just excited, so I kept it up.
Oh, okay. Other committee members, and I know Lisa Orman from the community has a question.
You have Doug.
Mark first, though.
No, you have Doug who has his hand up. Peter Frischoff from the community.
Doug Kleiman or Doug?
I'm sorry, Doug Kleiman has his hand up. Peter Frischoff from the community, Ira Gershorn from the community, and then I have one quick one if you have.
Let's get Doug Kleiman, then Peter Frischoff, then Mark Diller, and we'll see what else. And Lisa Orman, if she's still okay. So Doug Kleiman is first.
Some of this has already been said, but yes, I agree that if you're going to study where cameras go, you follow the crime clusters and where they're needed. Right? It also seems to me that aesthetics are important. So I think being able to camouflage cameras in the park may be easier even than some streets, because you have, a fake owl right behind you, John. But also I am curious as to where those clusters are with the graffiti. And yes, the cameras, can certainly be wired into the NYPD system, which is an incredible network of cameras. And yes, it's a deterrent, but it's also crime solving. So I think this should really be thought about seriously. Fear of living like Big Brother, but is even more important.
I wish I could say there's a specific location. There isn't. It's everywhere.
In the graffiti.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, it is everywhere.
It's just everywhere.
There's no clusters, or it's just.
I wish I could say, because in years past, for example, Soldiers and Sailors Monument got hit a lot, and we focus on that. That's not what's going on right now. It's every trash can and every bench and every.
And the NYPD is investigating. I assume that they're looking at the type of paint and the type of tags, if they're similar. These different people, are they multiple?
I don't know about the paint, but I think you mean how it's done. The tags, specific tags that are repeated, we keep track of that. Yes.
Yeah, but John, although the graffiti is everywhere, I've seen it everywhere certainly, and I know you guys are dealing with it everywhere. Some of the other types of vandalism can be focused, location focused, such as the moving the barriers, such as Polly mentioned, where I don't know that we have vandalism there, but at least concerns about safety at certain areas on Riverside Drive, bus stop areas and things like that. So I think, in my view, it would be possible to target, to say, hey, we've got 50 cameras or we've got 10 cameras, where are we going to put them, and to have a pretty reasonable discussion about maximizing their use if we went that direction. So Peter Frischhoff and then Mark Diller and then Lisa Orman. Peter, can you unmute yourself, Peter?
Yes, first of all, I just wanted to say well done on Cherry Walk. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that a little more in just a few minutes, Peter.
Okay, you want me to hold the comments for that?
Hold
or
the Cherry Walk for the moment, yeah.
Okay, I'll hold the Cherry Walk. Continue and I'll be back to you.
Okay,
bye-bye.
Mark Diller.
Can you hear Detective McDonald at all?
No, we didn't know you were with us.
Yeah, no, I'm 61 years of age, so technology is not my forte. But
no, we did. Welcome. We didn't know you were with us.
I'm on a. Well, that's fine. No, I'm on a landline. I think they called it back when I was a child.
Still do.
I just wanted to talk. I agree with what Mr. Harold said. Hopefully, the trouble down at the lower end in the 70s might just be one person, and hopefully he can be tracked down. But I just wanted to mention earlier in 2020, Helen Rosenthal was trying to get money from the city for. I thought some cameras were put in at certain entrances into the Riverside Park, but she was still working on that. At last I know of, to get more cameras into the park. And as Mr. Harold said, we just got to try to figure out where they are, what would be a good location. So anytime we can get involved with that again would be great. And whoever mentioned the emergency phones, I will look into that. I didn't realize that was on our end, the phones along the walk, for protection.
I don't know that they are. Or
yeah, but that's something I can look into.
I've met with police in the past to discuss them. So that.
Yeah, no, I'll figure that out.
Sure.
So Detective McDonald, you're so welcome with us tonight. So it's not your precinct that then would be involved in catching those kids who did the armed robbery, or the knife point robberies.
Well, actually, that was a group effort between the 2-0 and the 2-4 with the I think they were both juveniles.
Yeah, 14 and 16.
But, yeah, our guys were involved with it on the I forget what tour they were on, but there were two or three of our cops in connection with the 2-0. So that's usually what we try to do as in the department. If there's something going on that can affect everybody, we try to help out and try to get rid of it as quick as we can. And they got lucky with that one. I don't think it went on for more than a couple of days.
Oh, it was two incidents at knife point. I think both attacking couples. Not at least one of them was not just attacking one.
Right. Yeah.
Over some period of time. Are those kids in custody? Do you know, Detective?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that our CO, Inspector Yaguchi, and the 2-0 CO got involved, and we merged the manpower and got some results.
Did great work.
Yeah. I'd also like to point out on a sidebar that we put lights once in Riverside Drive for car break-ins.
Yes.
Extra lighting, and the community was pretty much against that. We had a lot of phone calls about that.
What do you mean by that?
Well, they didn't like the way the lights were so bright on Riverside Drive.
Lights. I thought you said legs. Lights. I see.
No, lights. Yeah.
I thought you meant patrol people, and that I didn't know why the community wouldn't like that. Lights. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they put extra lighting up, but you'd see like at concerts that break late at night, like to help people walk out.
Right.
We put some of them in the area, but it didn't go very well.
From legs, I think we go for. Mark Diller and Stephen. Then I think you want to say something else. We'll get to Lisa Orman. Mark Diller.
Mark, thank you. So Detective McDonald actually started down the path that I wanted to go on, which was there's probably two aspects of trying to get cameras into the park for any of these interdiction purposes. One would be the funding aspect, and Detective McDonald mentioned that Councilmember Rosenthal would be or our elected officials would probably be the right source for that, because I'm going to guess that John doesn't have money lying around that's not being used for something that could be put against this, so we would need to find him some more money. So let's assume that we have some chance of being successful in that. What would be the next step or steps in terms of a process to get a park approval to actually start implementing this once the cash was on hand? How would we go about doing it? Is that an application? Is that a budget request, or is that an application to parks itself? And is it Commissioner Silver? Is it at the borough level? Where would you suggest that we start with that?
Are you directing that to the detective or to me, Mark?
To you, John, because the detective hit the nail on the head with the money aspect of it, and I think I correctly guessed that you don't have the money, so we have to get it for you. But then once we have it, what do we do, or how do we parallel track that so that when money comes in, we can actually put it against this use? I assume that some aspect of that will be the where, and that's something that you were starting to talk about. But then there's just the, you got to get Parks approval to do this. So how will we go about doing that part of it?
Mark, let me just, if I could focus your question just a little more with John. John, as you know, and I think all our board members know, many of our community members know as well, certainly Ira does, there is a number of different budget processes. One of them is participatory budgeting, where it might be possible for one of us individually, or more than one of us, or the community board to have this as a participatory budgeting request that then would get voted on. It might win, it might not. That's one. Another is lobbying with our electeds for their discretionary council funds. And then, of course, as Mark mentioned, there's sort of Parks Department funds. So can you sort of talk about, those possibilities?
So the decision to put them in, if the funding were there, and if we knew what kind of cameras and how they worked and who's watching them and all those questions, it would be a question of what's their purpose, what are they in response to, and are they the best way to go about it in the opinion of the police, let's say, and it would be something that would be above me. It would be at the borough level and probably Commissioner Silver to decide. And I was going to say, I want to be very clear about something. The community board asked me to participate in a conversation. I don't want it to come out tomorrow in the paper that the Parks Department is planning to do anything.
Oh, no, we're not going to do that.
Clear. You asked me.
Yeah, sure.
I'm just, these are hypotheticals that I'm trying to respond to.
Matter of fact, I don't even see the press here tonight, but then, maybe they are. So, no, it's this is really, John, intended to be a very preliminary conversation to start talking about something that, to my knowledge, we haven't talked about before, but has kind of come to the fore as something to think about in light of the, in my view, the variety of rather, trouble, particular crimes.
As I said before, they are a tool. Yeah. Let's also bear in mind that, we've had graffiti before and it's gotten bad before and then it gets better. And we've had specific things like somebody cutting a fence every single night and fix it every single night. So these things happen. They're kind of part of life for us. And they are resolved not necessarily with cameras, although again, they're a tool. So it's really, what is the problem that we're trying to address and what's the best way to address it?
So I'm looking at the public. Iris got his hand up. Lisa, are you able to, Lisa
didn't have her hand up.
She was in the chat saying she wanted to say something.
Lisa and Ira have their hands up, Mark.
Pardon me?
I'm letting Mark know that Lisa and Ira have their hands up.
Lisa and Ira. I don't know whether Lisa has a problem with the audio or...
Okay, I promoted both of them, so they should be able to unmute.
But even before we turn to them, I don't want to lose track of this because Cindy is still with us from Councilmember Rosenthal's office, and the Detective McDonald mentioned that Helen had been looking at funding some cameras. That's news to us, I think. Cindy, is there anything you can add to our knowledge on that? And then we'll turn to the other speakers. Are you still with us,
it's actually news to me too.
Oh.
I have not seen anything about that. The detective was saying this was early last year that there was consideration. So do you know? Do you have more information than that? Who spoke to her, and was there a number?
I believe she got in touch with our inspector and my partner Steve Jones, and I believe, I'm not sure who he was involved with, but they went looking for locations where they could maybe put cameras within our end of Riverside Park. But I thought since then, I thought there was a camera somewhere at one of the entrances or exits to the park that was involved with that survey.
I mean, I'll look back at the records for discretionary funding last year and see if there was anything that had been allocated, and get back to you. It's not something that I'm aware of, but I can certainly look into it.
Thanks, Cindy, and we'll certainly work with you and with both precincts on that. So Lisa Orman, followed by Ira Gershenhorn.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I just wanted to say I agree with you, John, that we don't always solve these issues with cameras. They are used as tools in crimes, but I'm curious because we've covered a lot of different topics here, and I don't know if this is about graffiti or if it's about violence or if it's about moving barricades along the Esplanade. I will just remind people that some see graffiti as art and self-expression, and that I've actually been to museum exhibits in the city on that. So I welcome, talking about graffiti as art, and we don't always have to remove graffiti. I personally worry that adding cameras is a slippery slope and that this is actually potentially about policing cyclists. And I'd really rather the police focus on actual crimes and traffic violence. We keep asking in this community board for more policing amidst the backdrop of the Black Lives Matter movement, which to me as a taxpayer is quite upsetting. So I would not want to see cameras in the park. I think like Clary said, we all have our cell phones. It's really unfortunate when bad things happen in the park, bad things happen everywhere. But if we look at statistics and data, we know that more bad things are happening elsewhere. And I'd rather focus on that.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. Let's turn to Ira Gershenhorn. Although I have to say in response, I just can't resist saying in response to what Lisa said, I don't regard defacement of nearly every piece of Riverside Park with paint as art. I regard it as vandalism, and I applaud John and his staff's efforts to get rid of it, but it's a different opinion. We're going to turn to Ira, then there's something in the chat Mark's brought my attention to, so let's talk with Ira first.
Yeah, I would, I like the deterrent effect of cameras. I think you want to deter the crime before you actually have to charge someone or find someone. So I've always wondered, as a pilot study, just to have a sign and a fake camera. Because I know several years at the Ellington and the park, there was a destruction of the bathroom facilities there. And unfortunately, the Ellington people fixed it up. So, but I don't know if it's happened again since then. It's not something I monitor. Also, I know there's a lot of interest in wildlife cameras. It's nothing to do with protecting anyone and preventing graffiti. But I was at the volunteer house several years ago for the Christmas bird count. And it was like, wow, great place to stick a wildlife camera out those windows. And a lot of these wildlife cameras, you do have to take a chip out in case you don't have Wi-Fi, and but you do need power. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Ira. Are there anybody else, community board members, anybody else that wants to talk about the security cameras? And Detective McDonald, did you want to say something more? I think I see you lit up here.
No, I'm fine.
Okay, so the question now is, do we have an interest in any kind of proposed resolution from our committee asking for, and it would be very general at this point, investigation into the possibility of finding money for and some kind of at least initial limited program of security cameras in Riverside Park. Do we have a taste for that among the committee members or not? Several committee members really haven't spoken. I think, Doug, I haven't heard from you, or not sure we heard from Barbara on this one. What's our taste on this before we move on? I do have a taste for that, but I don't know, I may be the only one.
I agree.
I don't.
I think so too.
Was that a yes or a no from someone? Ken? Who said
no. For me, it's a no.
It's a no for Ken.
Barbara? And if I could give a couple of reasons.
Certainly.
I'm as some other people have said, I'm very wary of the surveillance state, which we are edging towards, or have been edging towards with cameras everywhere. Riverside Park is, I don't know how many acres, many acres, to have enough cameras to cover all the possible crimes that could go on there. It would just be untenable. We'd be lucky to have a camera in a place where there did happen to be a crime. I get the sense that John Harold is, you know, he's not exactly welcoming this with open arms. So reading between the lines, I think we should take a cue and just let this one be.
I've lost John from my screen. I'm not sure why. John, are you still with us? Have we lost John altogether?
He says he's still on via the chat.
Okay.
Somehow he got put into attendees. I just put him back.
Oh yeah, I see. I went blank. Okay, so John is
here. I have no idea what happened, but I'm back.
Okay, thanks, John. Barbara, do you have a taste for looking for starting to explore this or not?
I'm very much in favor of a resolution of this sort.
Okay, let's first poll committee members, because I guess that's really all we need to poll on this question. Natasha?
Yes, I'm in favor as well.
Susan? Yes. Doug McGowan?
It seems, based on the discussion, premature to begin discussions on a resolution. There didn't appear to me to be a reason or a tie between the use of video cameras and a potential to decrease, you know, the graffiti and or violence. I'd be interested in hearing more from the security professionals on their take on the relevance of using these type of devices.
So what we have, because Caputo's not with us, am I missing somebody? We had Ken and Doug were no for now. Barbara, Natasha, Susan and I are yes. Who am I missing?
Can I just say, I wanted to let everyone in the committee speak and just add my thoughts. First, I wanted to thank Detective McDonald for coming. And Brown, I appreciate you responding, and everyone should know he came at the last minute. So thank you very, very much for coming today.
Yes, thank you.
Number two is, I kind of, my viewpoint is similar to Doug's. I think this is a very interesting topic, but I think it's a little early. I also know that there was conversations from Susan about, you know, do we bring in Central Park? Should we bring in other parks? And I also think that we've got an inch load of data. And if we're going to make some type of recommendation, I would want it to be thoroughly thought through. I'd love to get more feedback from the other precincts, particularly the Central Park precinct. And I just think that we've started a process, but I think it would be recommended to make sure that we're very thorough in what we put forward. And I'll support what you guys do. I'm just giving my thoughts that I would recommend continuing this conversation and digging in a little bit more would be my thought process. I would have lots of questions around data, and I'm generally in support of this type of action, but I think that, again, it would be good to get some more data and more thoughts, and we feel like we're more at the beginning than the end, and that would be my recommendation.
Well, I see that Barbara's hand is up and Ken's hand is up again, so I'm going to call them in just a moment, but my personal response to what we've been hearing here is that I don't get the idea that it's of prematurity. That is, this is an initial discussion. I don't think our resolution would ask a particular number of cameras or any locations, but our discussion has been intentionally addressed to Riverside Park and not to Central and not other parks. And the reason is that there have been some very specific major incidents of crime in Riverside Park that in the view of some of us at least might well have either been prevented or caught if cameras were in those locations. So I'm not looking for more data, and I don't think it's premature, but I want to hear what the people who had their hands up have to say about this. It was Barbara and Ken again. Barbara?
I actually put my hand down, Clary.
Okay.
I think perhaps if people think that it's premature, we can wait, but I'd like to bring in Central Park also. Definitely the Central Park Police, because it was a terrible murder in Central Park, you might remember, with a Columbia University student. And there are places in Central Park that are very desolate, like in the Ramble. And although cameras may not work there because it's so leafy, one or two or even one of those phones could really, I think could really help. Just any kind of security signal.
We invited Chris Nolan, who is the administrator of Central Park and also vice president of the Conservancy. And we invited as well Caroline Greenleaf, who is the community, I can't remember what her whole title is, Ken may know, or Mark may know, to join us tonight. And we didn't hear one way or another from them, but we certainly invited them to be with us to participate in the discussion. But as I say, the discussion was really intended to focus initially on Riverside Park and not our other parks. Ken, you wanted to say something more? And Peter, perhaps, if you, Peter Frischhoff, did you want to address this, or are we still waiting for the, we'll get there shortly, the Cherry Walk?
No, I did want to, this is regarding, general security, something that I think everybody in parks should be aware of and try and put some pressure on the city, is that neither 311 or 911 can accurately determine somebody's location in the park.
Right.
So that's a real problem. It's because the systems are designed to find people at an intersection. So if you're on the promenade someplace or on the bike path, or you're behind the sewage treatment plant, and you do a call, it's very difficult. And the operators, in my experience, are not really well trained to be able to position you to get help. I had a
that
situation.
problem with EMS as well, Peter.
Okay, yes. So that is something that the Parks Committee should continue to put pressure on the city. This has been, a problem now for 15 years and nothing has happened. So you guys really should make a stink about that. If people are going to be relying on their phones to call for assistance, it may not come.
Well, I think there have been some improvements. A few years ago, the calls were R311, people thought they were from New Jersey. And I think we got that fixed, but not totally. Okay. Thanks, Peter. So we have 4 members who would like to do something tonight. That's Barbara, Natasha, me, and Susan. We have 2 who don't want to do anything tonight. Barbara, Natasha, Susan, we need to wrap this up, but I mean, I'm inclined to offer a resolution that would not be fully formed, but get the general idea, take a vote, see what happens. Susan?
Have we gotten rid of the filibuster?
Susan?
I think, as I think about it further, what Stephen says is correct. I am concerned about whether or not there's a greater need in Central Park for this sort of thing, or Riverside Park, and I think it might be important to, since no one from Central Park was here, to table this for right now and have another go at it next month or at some point in the future, so we can wait to hear from the appropriate authorities who govern those other park areas.
Well, if you're saying that you would not vote for a resolution, that would leave us 3-3, in which if you vote no, then there's not a lot of point in proposing a resolution. Is that what you're saying?
I was trying to say it tactfully, but yes.
Okay. Oh, I think my husband has just walked in. Close the door, please, Richard. So I guess we won't. I mean, I'm disappointed because I don't think we were aiming, or at least I wasn't thinking of aiming for anything big or permanent or final or at all fully developed. It was really a starting a process. But I guess we don't have the votes tonight. Mark, do you have any suggestions for us? Diller.
There it is. There. A way to go about it would be I think, well, a way to go about it would be to consider it as part of your district needs statement and part of your budget priorities statement. This committee always does an amazing job with that. And that would be an opportunity, if you started now, to gather some of the data that Stephen was talking about, to put it into perspective. You can have your conversation with the Parks Department and sort of see where that might lead. And that could give you a multi-park and multi-location opportunity, and at the same time try to solve the problem of where's the money going to come from anyway. It would be a slower process, and I hear that there is some frustration with that, but it might be the deliberative process that would actually get results. That would be my 2 cents worth.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I mean, with all respect to Stephen, I'm not sure what data he's talking about, but why don't we
I can answer that. There's data about crime. There's data about how often crime happens. There's a tremendous amount of data about crime. And I certainly would think that we would want to get direct feedback from the detective. Has been great, but I think that the 20th and 24th they would all have some type of formal statement to give us. And if we want to get behind this, I think it'd be much more powerful getting broad support from all these people filled with that type of thing rather than kind of a couple conversations and this is what we think. Just to clarify my thinking, if we believe in this, then this is a strong conversation. We're talking about the police and cameras. These are not small, tiny topics. So done in a very thorough way, if this is the belief of the committee, I think would benefit that all aspects of it. But that would be my clarification.
So John, for instance, when someone moves the barriers at, let's say, 83rd Street that are in place to direct cyclists, is that reported as a crime? Because it happens, it happens frequently, not every day. Is that a reported crime?
It's an incident. It's an incident. If we caught someone doing it, it could be classified as a crime. I don't know that we've reported every single incident as a crime.
Yeah, I mean, my sense is that a lot of what we're talking about certainly doesn't make it into NYPD crime statistics, but let's move on. I think we just don't have the support tonight to do a resolution. So some of us individually may choose to try to pursue the question in a different way, but let's move on to our next topic, and that's going to be a much shorter one. And then Margaret Bracken, who's been, I think, still waiting patiently, we'll get our path renovation project presented as well. So what we put in just quite recently into our agenda is a very brief discussion tonight on the Cherry Walk, and I know that Peter Fishoff wants to talk about that, and we have both John and Margaret. This was a fabulous result now, where the Cherry Walk, which is from roughly 100th Street to 125th, depending on how you count your streets, has been, riprap has been repaired, and many of the areas that had for a very long time fallen in, subsided, have been repaved in areas, and it's wonderfully improved. So kudos to the Parks Department for getting that done. Peter, do you want to say something about this? So we had just a couple specific questions. We're not going to spend more than 5 minutes on that, but Peter Fishoff, did you want to speak to that?
Yes. First of all, I totally agree. Cherry Walk has been transformed. It is so much better. So congratulations for doing that. We'll look in the lessons learned department. I wrote a piece for Streets Blog, including a video celebrating the Cherry Walk. Maybe somebody wants to put that in the chat, and people can enjoy it at their leisure. But it's beautiful. The views are splendid, as always. Looking around, I was looking to see Ira swimming in the Hudson, but he didn't show up. Probably some excuse about it's being too cold. Right. But it's great. But looking back, in an effort to do things like this better in the future, when it was closed, the signage for the detours were minimal to non-existent, and for bicyclists, especially who were to be directed up to Riverside Drive and then across the the Denny Farrell Bridge at 155th Street, the signage was just pathetic. There was nothing for motorists. There's a lot more traffic on Riverside Drive now, so it really made for a pretty hazardous situation for cyclists who were riding on Riverside Drive, myself included. So please, in the future, it's the most heavily used bicycle path in the nation by some accounts, and we should really do a little bit better in terms of detour signage. But it is a job really, really well done. That so many of the tree root heaves were fixed is just great, and that you did this in the kind of off season. It was very, very, very good. And all the lights, I just was on it less than 2 hours ago. In fact, I started listening to this meeting when I was on the ride. All the lights are functioning, and that's really great too. The part that really could use some improvement is the lighting on the ramp that goes to and fro Harlem Piers Park, the last quarter mile, because the street lights there, the lighting is only what is left over from the highway, and it's really quite dark. If somebody is walking by that ramp, that's a real problem. So if that could be put on the agenda for future improvements, it could be easily improved with a little bit of engineering. There really does need to be better lighting on that stretch. That was not done as part of the original lighting improvement project, which was done several years ago. But overall, it's really been transformed. I hope that that laminate will be installed to demarcate where walkers should walk by the riverside and bicyclists can ride. And I know that there's a weather window, and that can't really start until March. So I was hoping if you could address that and put on our wish list better lighting for walkers and bicyclists by the ramp. So it's not, the pavement isn't perfect, but it is so much better that I'm not complaining. So enjoy the story in street blogs, and thank you, Parks and whoever else made this happen.
Thanks, Peter. And I wanted to, that's very useful to help us focus on just a couple questions that we had for John and or Margaret about this project, or questions and comments. One is, and Ken and I have talked about this, my husband and I actually walked the whole Cherry Walk on this last weekend, and it was fabulous. And Ken has biked it, as you have, Peter. Maybe others here have as well. The first question we had is, how did you parlay how did the financing work? We know it was FEMA money, but we thought it was only going to be some of the riprap for a few blocks, and yet we're delighted to find that so many sections have been repaved a few 10, 20, 30 feet here and there. How did you manage to do that?
So the money for the riprap repairs was from FEMA, as you said, and it was specifically to address these areas that washed out as a result of Hurricane Sandy. When the contract for the work was funded, the contingency allowance, which any contract has, was funded by the city. We had to wait until the FEMA work was done to see how much it cost and whether there was any contingency money left. And when we saw that there was, then because there's no restriction on spending the mayoral money that was in there as the contingency, we were able then to allocate that to these other repairs. But we didn't know whether we would be able to do that until the FEMA work was done and fully covered.
That's the explanation. And kudos to all of you, John and Margaret, and whoever else you worked with for that result, which has been, I see Andy Rosenthal is thumbs up on two sides here too. He's a cyclist, we know that. So the other two questions, and Peter's actually adverted to these two, we were fielding constant complaints about the detour signage. And finally I said to Ken, CB7 is just not gonna deal with these, just have anybody who's complaining contact Jeff or you directly, and I know many people did, and Ken did as well. But what our impression is, what it stemmed from is a more general concern, because we've seen it at the 72nd Street area as well, not as severe an issue, but a lot of problems there too with detour signage. Is it the case that in these Parks Department contracts, it's up to the contractor to design, locate, place, maintain the detour signage? Because that's,
well,
it doesn't work.
Well, so the contractor is going to be required to put whatever signage is in the contract. And usually it's not all that extensive. What made this particular one, and I hear you about the other detours further south, but what made this so complicated is that you've got to get from down on the waterfront up to your choice, Riverside Drive, Broadway, however you want to go. And it's not straightforward. It's not turn left and go 3 blocks and then it's a little bit complicated. Adding to that, the only place we could provide a ADA standard slope, not that we were doing it for ADA reasons, but for cyclists, was all the way up at 151st Street. If you knew your way through the neighborhood, you could just simply go across the marked bike lane on 125th Street over to Broadway and up and then back over. But we didn't want to sign it that way, just as we couldn't direct people to go the wrong way down the service road to get back. We had to go with traffic patterns. So it was a little complicated. I'm going to respond by saying, give Margaret Bracken the kudos for getting the work done, and I'll fall on my sword on the signs.
Okay.
And hopefully by 2022, or whenever we do get to rebuilding Cherry Walk completely, we'll do a better job. We heard you. We made an effort. It wasn't helpful to a lot of people, so we'll try to do better next time.
Thanks, John. And we completely agree with the kudos to Margaret. Yeah, so I mean, we don't want to belabor this, but it seems to be an issue to some extent wherever you've got a construction project going on that, I mean, I know I personally see signs that they should be to the east of the path, but they're to the left, or they're turned around in the wrong direction, or they start out in the right direction and next time you know they're turned around. I mean, just a lot of different, or it says our work's going to be from, November 1st to December 1st, and the work hasn't even started. But then the work's over and the sign is still there 3 months later. It's just a lot of different stuff. And I don't think there's any point in belaboring it anymore tonight unless anybody else wants to say.
I had a question, Chloe.
Yes, Ken.
Just a couple of questions. First of all, it is terrific. Given, I don't know how much, I'm very curious how much the contingency money was. But then my other question is on the lane markings. So would you be waiting until a complete repaving, which I think you said you're looking at 2022 for that, or is there something temporary you could put in?
Well, it is an expense. It's not something that we do in-house. A contractor would have to be engaged to do it. It's really a funding issue. If we had a contract with those items in it, it could be done, and that's the I don't want to say the easiest way. I'm not going for the easiest way, but that we can certainly put it in the capital project when the time comes. Doing it in some other fashion is more complicated particularly right now with OMB, being very careful about how the city is spending money.
So John, are you saying that as of now, you have neither money nor immediate plan to redo lane markings on Cherry Walk? Is that what it means to them?
As of right now, that's correct.
In a sense, I would comment, I think that's sort of a good thing, and for the following reason. The Cherry Walk was always marked, and the markings largely disappeared after a few years, and the Cherry Walk's been, what, 20 plus years by now, I think. Unlike other paths and unlike the instinct that people have, having been trained in the United States, keep to the right, the way the markings went on a relatively narrow total path there was all pedestrians going northbound and southbound were to keep to the river side of the path. And all cyclists in both directions were to keep to the easterly section of the path. That led to enormous confusion, counterinstinctive, many people not doing that. And I will say that when Richard and I were, my husband and I were down there last Saturday or Sunday, there was almost nobody on the Cherry Walk. We totally forgot that. I mean, there were no markings. We kept to the right because that was the instinctive thing to do. So again, we don't want to belabor this tonight, but I think when you get to the point where you are looking at redoing the lane markings, I think CB7 would very much, and 9 probably as well, CB9 would probably very much like to participate with you in visiting the question of whether you retain that division just for the Cherry Walk, because the rest of the Esplanade is keep to the right. Or do it somewhat differently. I guess we don't need or want to talk about it anymore tonight because you're not going anywhere for a while.
Yeah. So remember that Cherry Walk was built, as you said, 20 plus years ago. There was no West Harlem Piers Park. There was no extension of the Greenway north of 135th Street. There was no River Walk. There was no Riverside Park South.
There was no Hudson River Park Greenway either.
Precisely. This was a, wouldn't it be lovely if you could go up along the Hudson, west of the highway? That's really where that came from. And the scheme that was included then reflected the intent at the time and the circumstances at the time. Certainly, when we do get to it, that's on the table for sure.
Great. So we want to be at that table. Anything else on the Cherry Walk? If not, we will. I don't see anybody else on this one.
Lisa has her hand up. I'm not sure if it's about this.
Oh, I don't see Lisa's hand, but we'll call on Lisa. Lisa? Lisa Orma? I don't see her hand. I don't see Lisa. Oh, there she is. Okay, Lisa.
Well, I'm just curious. You said you won't be working on the lane markings, but will you be doing the repaving work?
Which repaving work?
So from my understanding, there was going to be a complete repaving done in fall of 2022, but is that not necessary anymore, or?
No, that's what I was referring to when I said when the time comes. That's exactly the project I'm talking about.
So you're saying that that's not necessarily happening unless it's in the capital plan?
No, I didn't say that at all.
Oh, okay. I'm confused.
No, I said things like I didn't say all of this, but the things that have been mentioned tonight, the lighting, the striping, the emergency phones, all of these ideas would be looked at then as part of that project.
Okay, so the repaving work is happening in fall of 2022.
It's still in the schedule, yes.
Okay, so I guess my question is, what have we learned from this process that we can apply to that process? And one thing that we've heard over and over is that we need better detour signage and information, both on the website, but also QR codes on the signs so that if you do catch yourself down there, you can use a QR code to map your way out of there. But also I'm curious, if we have that much time, I hope that we can work with DOT and come up with a detour that is protected along Riverside Drive or taking a lane of the Henry Hudson, because that's plenty of time to get that done. And I'm curious your perspective on how to move that forward.
I think finding a consensus on what is the best route is a great idea. As I say, if you know the park and you know the neighborhood, there are a dozen different ways you can go, and to pick one and sign it is one way to go. But then to pick the simplest one to sign, may not be the most logical one, but it's the easiest one. Certainly it's something I'd love to work with you and others on to figure out, how do we do this? Because there are multiple ways to do it. You may remember we talked with you a year and a half ago. We can put people on Broadway. We can put people up St. Clair Place. There are different ways to do it. So certainly, I'd love to find the best way to do it.
Yeah, and I would love to include, as Clary said, CB9, but also DOT in those discussions, because obviously they would need to help us if we were going to create a parking protected or some sort of protected bike lane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, we look forward to a year or two from now, less than two, working on that project with you.
So do we.
Yeah, I know. So if that's it on this one, let us turn to our long-waiting colleague, Margaret Bracken, who has a right now project she wants to show us. And this is going to be a resolution from us tonight. So we're going to have some action out here. Margaret, yes, right. That's right. We're next.
Yeah, I think
ready for Margaret.
I think Mark was going to be in charge of the PowerPoint. Mark, are you still on board with that?
Yes.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your help with this. Well, I'm going to start out by saying thank you to John and all of you for giving me much more credit than I deserve for Cherry Walk. I mean, you really have to thank the project managers, designer from Olmsted Center, and the resident engineer, who spent many days walking up and down Cherry Walk, marking all of those locations that we were all so familiar with. And also some member of the community had been very helpful in spray painting them as well. So really they're the people who deserve the thanks. And they've been very happy to read all of your sort of good, your comments about the success of the work there. So, and I'll pass, your comments from this evening on to them.
Thanks, Mark.
So this is a very, very simple project. I mean, you've heard us talk about the State of Good Repair initiative for a little while now. And these are 2 of our 4 sites that we're doing with this project in this initiative in Riverside Park. Basically, State of Good Repair is just, it's sort of the successor to the requirements, which is just a means to try to do very simple projects very, very quickly. And they've simplified it even further just to make these about really, basically simple paving projects. So if you could move ahead, Mark, with the next slide. So the goals with these 2 sites are basically remove existing deteriorated asphalt, install new full depth asphalt, which is, substantial pavement. In areas where the pavement is not in such terrible condition, we would just put top course on top of the existing. There's an area where we need a little bit of a curbing to address some drainage problems. These paved areas are pretty irregular in some cases, so repaving them improves ADA access. One of the sites we're installing some new benches, and at both of the sites we're clearing existing drainage structure and doing some tree care, pruning, and any other essential tree care. If you could do the next one, please, Mark. So the first site is at just north of 79th Street, the park entrance north of 79th Street. And this is an area that runs between River Run Playground and the park wall. Next one, Mark. We can just go quickly through the next 2 because these are just kind of boilerplate slides that we put in to show. The blue on the left is the flood zone. It's well out of the flood zone and it's in the park. The next one, and then we'll move on to the next one. So this is basically the area of pavement that we're proposing to reconstruct. As I said, it's been between the playground and Riverside Drive. It's in very, very poor condition. We'll do a little bit of tree care, remove the existing asphalt, and install completely new asphalt. Next slides should give us some idea of the existing condition. As you can see, it's in really, really poor condition. The pavement is uneven, it's cracking. And next slide, please. And in that case, particular area, we will be completely replacing it. We'll do a little bit of work on the left-hand side there to sort of improve the drainage into this area. And on the right-hand side of the image on the left, that's the area where we're proposing to put some new benches. And in this area, this is a State of Good Repair work, but as you all are aware, we've had a really great donor who has approached the Riverside Park Conservancy and has been funding quite a lot of reconstruction projects in the park. So the next slide it is actually on the east side of River Run Playground, where
west
we have
side.
West side.
Oh, the west side, sorry, the west side of River Run Playground, where we have existing pavement, which in some cases in pretty decent condition. I mean, some areas require more substantial work, but in general, it's in sort of fairly good condition. So this private donor has committed to giving us the funding to do some reconstruction in this area as well, which is really fabulous because that means the entrance to 79th Street, the pavement is in good condition. To the north of this area, north of 83rd Street, the pavement is in good condition. But this gives us an opportunity to completely sort of restore the pavement all around the playground, both the east side and the west side here. So that is going to be very beneficial. And the next site is, or well, actually this shows you more clearly the two areas. In the red on the right-hand side of this image here is the area where we're proposing to completely reconstruct, all new pavement, clean the catch basins, replace one existing catch basin, put new benches in. The left-hand side is the area where the existing pavement is in better condition. So in this area, we'll just be putting sort of top course down and doing some additional work in areas that require it. The next site is at 97th Street. Again, around the southern side of a playground. The pavement proposed here is from just a little bit north of Dinosaur Playground on the east side, sort of going down to the entrance at 96th Street, and then back around the west side of the playground. This shows the location of the site, well out of the flood zone again, and in parkland facing the residential area of Riverside Park. Next one. This shows the scope of the work here, a little bit more substantial. So we're going almost up to the career stairs there at 99th Street, down to the 97th Street entrance, a little bit round to the west of the playground, and then down to what we have as a vehicular entrance. Thank you. Vehicular entrance into the park at 96th Street. All of this pavement is in really poor condition, but the existing pavement to the north of this area of work is all in good condition and has been reconstructed fairly recently. So again, it completes this area of the park. You know, the adjacent pavement is in good condition and it allows us to address the pavement that is in very poor condition. Next slide for existing conditions. So these are the existing conditions there. As you can see in the upper image, the asphalt is pretty much all but gone in some areas. And in the images on the right-hand side, we have some existing drainage structures that need to be replaced, and we would clean all of the existing drainage structures. Next slide. And at the entrance at 97th Street, which is the lower slide here, we have a little bit of a kind of, drainage issue there. So this is the area where we're proposing to put granite block landscape edging, which we use in some areas of the park where we have drainage problems. And on the left-hand side in the upper image, you see an existing concrete curb, which is in decent condition and will remain, but there's a couple of areas where that needs to be replaced. So, as I said, very, very simple work, but, pavement that is long overdue in areas of the park where it's in really poor and really deteriorated condition. So these are, great improvements to the park. And the last slide, oh, not the last slide, the slide that shows the scope of the work at 97th Street, and the last slide, which shows, the typical work that we're proposing. New benches at 83rd Street, or at 79th to 83rd Street, and on the right-hand side, some recent work that we did around Crabapple Grove at 91st Street. And this is typical of the granite block edging treatment that we use, as I said, in areas where we have drainage issues, which we had. We had to contain the water on the path at 91st Street, and we have some areas at 97th Street where this treatment will be necessary, but it won't be universal in the way that it is here. And that's it. So mostly city money, but with a little bit of private money to do some additional work. And I'm sort of bundling them together because it's the easiest way to get them all approved.
Thank you, Margaret. And I have a suspicion you're going to leave here with a favorable resolution tonight on this. But let's take some questions from committee members. Ken's hand is up.
Yeah. Hi, this as somebody who uses 97th Street a lot, this is really welcome. It's right now, I'd characterize it as a moonscape.
Yeah.
A few questions. I take it you're not going to be addressing the ramp that's goes from 90, that's next to the stairs.
Actually, we will repave that.
Oh.
So, we'll just put top course on top of that. It wasn't included in the footprint there, but the bluestone step ramp that's on the south side of that entrance there will stay as is. And the asphalt, the existing asphalt that is on the northern ramp there, that will just be replaced with top course asphalt on top of it to sort of assist with strollers and cyclists and even the occasional vehicle entering the park at that point.
Okay.
The bluestone ramp, the step ramp was rebuilt, what, 5 years ago, Margaret? Not even.
I think even less than that. There was a lot of storm damage in that area, and the Conservancy paid for that step ramp to be repaired, reconstructed about 2 years ago.
And what's the timeline? When would this happen? And how long would it be closed?
So the private work, the great benefit of that work is we can do it really quickly. So that we'll do in the spring, whenever the weather improves. So we'll be looking at March, April, May in there. And I would anticipate that work just taking 2 to 3 weeks at absolute most. The work on the other side will probably take, I would say at most a month, because it's really pretty simple. And we are hoping we've got a little bit of backlog at the moment because of COVID. So projects have not been moving through the OMB approvals as quickly as we would like, but this project is actually about to go out to bid. So, in theory, hopefully we should be building the 2 state of good repair projects later this year.
We lost you, Ken.
How long would you, sorry? You got it?
We're losing you in and out on the audio, Ken.
Oh, how about now?
It's good.
How long would you expect the new pavement to last?
Well, we typically say 15 years, but my experience is that it lasts longer than that. I mean, I would say, especially for the areas that are full depth asphalt, I would say at least 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in case he doesn't ask it, I noticed in the chat, Ira was bemoaning the fact that we're using more oil to put down asphalt. So I was wanted to ask you, are there any alternatives to asphalt?
Well, the thing is, we talk about this quite a lot, and for interior park paths that are very heavily used and there is constant vehicular usage, really this is what works best. It is most sort of, most practical really for a busy public park. I don't know of another alternative that would be as durable and inexpensive or affordable, given our budget than asphalt.
Is that it for you, Ken?
Yes.
Other committee members first? I don't see any hands of other committee members. Stephen, you've got your hand up?
Yeah, at first, I can tell you that I'm ecstatic about this because these are, I live on 84th and Riverside, so I'm very much used those areas. So I'm glad Ken gets you in the north and I get you in the south, although I do use the 97th as well. Couple just notes, so just encouragement and very giving you positive feedback, but I did want to make a note, a question you brought up. I think you brought up that the benches are all being replaced, because what I would say is particularly the east side around 83rd is heavily used because it's in the shade. So lots of people like to sit there in the shade. Also, lots of kids like to run up on those rocks. So a lot of parents stay there. So that is a heavily used area. But the next question is about the flooding. I think you mentioned it, but it gets heavily flooded. Will that be, I think you mentioned it. Can you clarify?
Yeah.
That is a big concern because after a big rainfall or something, it's a bit of a marsh. And it would just be a shame to kind of fix it all up and just have it a marsh on a really better place to sit. And the other point I'd make, and then I'll let you comment. And then even on the west side, I think it's a little bit worse than I think you're saying. It is better, but even when it rains and by the middle of the winter, that area is, I just don't undervalue that area needs to definitely be cleaned up a little bit. Lots of people walking down into there, and it definitely gets dicey. You know, that area has to be cleaned up as well. But I did want to bring up the flooding part. It's a major problem, and I would just think it would be a shame if that doesn't get addressed properly. That is a major reason why people don't sit there at certain parts of the,
Stephen, you're talking about both east of the playground and where they're doing the state of good repair work, and west of the playground that you just mentioned. I think you're talking about both of those areas for flooding. Is that right?
Yeah. East is much worse. It's literally, west gets a little funky as well, but east is really bad. And that is a real area that people like to sit, again, particularly in the spring and the summer hot days.
Okay, so the benches, we'll pretty much be replacing them in kind. There are 5 benches. We're not replacing the benches on the kind of like the southern side, and that would be like the west side of the path. That's not within the scope, but we are replacing all of those existing benches that basically face the playground. So those they'll just be new benches in, spaced a little more regular than they are now, but they'll be in those same locations. Regarding the drainage there, one of the reasons that it is so messy basically is because a lot of the asphalt's gone. So, it's one of those areas of the park when you get a lot of rain, you're basically walking on mud. Forget the asphalt, there's not much asphalt left. So basically the fact that you have new full depth asphalt there means you're going to have, that's part of the problem addressed there. The other thing is the grading. It's not pitched towards the existing catch basins. So, we'll remedy that. So any water that is on the path will then kind of be pitched to the existing catch basins. And the area immediately west of, where the benches are, where you look into it, we do have drainage problems there. I mean, there's a low point in the park, and there has been for many years standing water there. And we don't really have anywhere else to put that water because there's no sort of drainage structures there. I mean, we'll put a slight berm, we'll raise the level of the path on the west side there so that any water that's on the path isn't sheeting into that area. So the water that is then falling in that area will be water that, falls into the area of landscape. And what we did there, this actually came up at, when we were talking about drainage strategies at the last community board meeting that I was at, was, sometimes you don't have drainage structures and there's nowhere physically to channel the water. So you just sort of do the best you can in that area, with sort of implementing a landscape solution. So what we've done in that area is planted bold cypress, which are actually native trees. They look like conifers, but they're actually deciduous. And they're really gorgeous trees. And they really like to be in damp areas. And we found since we planted those trees that they really have kind of sucked up a lot of the water in that area. And we've also planted perennials underneath. And the perennials, again, are sort of, perennials that like getting their feet wet, that are, so basically we've tried to turn it into, make the most of it as a sort of naturally damp habitat and plant material that likes living there. And bald cypress are really cool. I mean, that's what they have in the bayous in New Orleans. So you think it's wet there, but in the bayous, they get these things called knees. So as those trees get older, you'll start to see these little sort of, it's like a growth that comes up from the root system. And there's these little kind of like bumps. So, I mean, it's actually ecologically, it's going to develop into, and already is, a kind of, interesting and attractive area of the park. So, and then the other side, on the west side, I agree. I'm blithely sitting here saying, oh, we'll just put some top course over it. It's more complicated than that.
Okay.
There are areas that need full depth asphalt. We need to key it into the existing pavement. You can see at one point there's differential settlement because there's a concrete structure. The highway structure is underneath. I mean, it's more than just putting a little smear of asphalt down. We're going to have to do a little bit of regrading. We're going to have to make sure our pitch is right for all of the existing catch basins. and some areas are going to require more substantial work.
Okay.
So I oversimplified it.
Well, that's fine. I just
help me out.
I'm sure it's all and I just one thing.
Stephen, yes.
I guess I think I know the answer. The sidewalk issue that's outside of the 97th Street, that's not your responsibility though, right? I mean, the area between the entrance to the Dinosaur Park and as you go up north and then go down, that sidewalk has like problems on it that I think need to be fixed at some point, but I don't think that's your responsibility.
It is their responsibility, but it's not this project, right?
You mean north of the entrance at 97th Street where we get standing water?
I'm talking about where you walk into the Dinosaur Park, and if you keep walking north, whether it's 98th, 99th, that's sort of, that's a really, particularly the sidewalk, that's not the sidewalk, but behind the benches up against the thing is still very, very, you need to redo that at some point. I'm just pointing
out. Absolutely. It needs to be redone. It's
if we were going to do the whole area.
Don't we have that as a budget priority, John? Don't we have that as a budget priority? Cindy may know as well, that sidewalk area. If you're talking about sidewalk.
We've been trying to get it funded for quite some time.
Yeah.
Okay. If you're going to, I'm so happy you're doing that whole area. It would just be a shame to have that one area that's pretty bad and people can trip really easily if they're kind of walking fast and kids come running down the thing, and just something I just wanted to point out that it would be great to fix as well.
We'd love to get it done.
I do think we've looking already for years have been looking for money for that. I don't see any other hands, but Margaret, I wanted to ask my own. Well, we'll get to Andy. Let me do this and we'll get to you as well. Stephen started to focus on this and you were talking about it as well, but I ended up really confused. I know I've brought to your attention many times, including over the weekend, the west area that is 5 and 6, areas 5 and 6, west of the River Run Playground, which is very low, gets totally flooded. It was so flooded last week that the whole adjacent, well, it's not really grassy area, but muddy, which is the non-paved area was completely flooded. When there's snow and ice, it lasts there forever. Everywhere else is clear, and if there's still ice down there. So I'm unclear on two things. One, were you saying that area west of River Run that shows us 5 and 6 on your slide, that's being privately funded with not state of good repair versus public funding for state of good repair, not just at 97th, but on the east side of the playground? That's what I thought you were saying. And a related question is, how much is the private funding? Is that part of the 920,000?
Yes, it is, correct.
Okay.
So the area west of the playground is privately funded. The area east of the playground is state of good repair.
And how much is the area west of the, how much is the funding rather?
I believe it's around about 220,000.
That's real money. But I think what you were just saying is, even though that's not a state of good repair area, that it does need more than just a top coat. And
I said it was, I said that we were doing top course there, but there are areas where we need to do a little bit more work. We'll remove a little bit more asphalt in areas where it's irregular or in the areas where the asphalt is in poor condition. But the greater part of the asphalt there is actually in decent condition and will be used as a base, and we'll put more asphalt on top of it.
Is any of that going to help with how low it is and the lack of drainage and the flooding over there? Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good. Do we have anything else? Oh, I'm sorry, Andy Rosenthal.
Yeah, hopefully quick, Margaret. Just sort of following up on Ira's point, the roadway to the east of the River Run Playground is quite wide, and does it have to be that wide? Less asphalt, I think Ira would be happy. It would have less of a heat island effect going forward for climate change. So just curious whether that could be skinny. It would probably save you some money too.
Well, I mean, in this case, it really wouldn't save us some money because we'd have to remove all of the existing asphalt. It would make it more expensive. But I think the bigger picture there is, regardless of the expense and, talking about sort of environmental aspects and everything, The path the path that we're doing the state of good repair, which is the path that is on the east side of River Run Playground, is relatively narrow, and there are benches there. There's quite a lot of benches there. So the path on the west side tends to be a path that we use more, for vehicular access. So I think it's actually pretty beneficial in an area where you have a playground and you also have benches to sort of have that additional width there. I mean, do you have anything to add to that, John? I mean, I think it's actually, it's helpful at times to have that additional width. When you have off-leash dogs, when you have, children going to and from the playground. I mean, I find that
building a path at the bare minimum isn't always the best way to do it. Just because the park does get used by a lot of people and bikes and our vehicles, having a little bit extra width is, in the long run, is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, my husband and I see vehicles in that area, the west side of the playground frequently, and you sort of have to try to scurry around.
I'm specifically talking about the east side, because I do think the west side should be maintained and can be used by vehicles to access the playground. The east side really isn't necessary. Yes, vehicles use it, but they really shouldn't and don't need to, in my mind.
You're saying remove the pavement on the east side altogether?
No, just narrow it. Make it a walking path that was not wide enough for cars.
Well, it's not really that wide as it is at the moment. And
but
there also are times when we do have to take vehicles on almost every park path. We have to bring forestry in or for emergency vehicles. Yes, we really have to have a width of, any path that we need to bring vehicles on really needs to be 10 feet.
Okay, you've thought about it. I just wanted to ask. It sounds like.
No, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just, both John and Jeff and I, all of us, we kind of work, we're always thinking about how do we make this work? How do we maintain the park? The practical aspects of it.
So good question, good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I don't think we have anything else on this, and let's move on because we have a couple of updates, and I see that, although I don't see his picture, Matt Genrich from our district has been with us all evening, and I know.
All right, can I interrupt? Kari, can we? Yeah. If we're going to have a resolution on that, can we just call the question on that one? Because I know we've delayed that a little bit. Can we just call that and then have the updates afterward?
Oh no, that's right. No, if we have a resolution, we do it right now.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. We're finishing this item.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, of course. Let's try to do this efficiently. I'm going to propose one more question, Margaret. What is your timing? Do you have any? Do you have to go to LPC? Do you have to go to the Public Art Commission?
Yeah, we'll submit the project to Landmarks, as a package like this, Okay. So, and hopefully, as I said, the privately funded project we hope to build this spring. The state of good repair we hope will be by the end of the year.
Okay. So this is not too much of a challenge for us at this point. I'm just going to propose a resolution that approves the package. And as usual, we'll put in a few flattering words about Margaret's work and about the need for this. I don't think we need to be more complicated about it now. Anybody want to talk about it anymore? Or we take a vote.
Just throw the word appropriate in there somewhere.
Right. Right. I mean, we tend not to remember that necessarily on a purely on this kind of a project, but good point. If it's going to LPC, we want to say appropriate. Thank you, Mark. It's something I usually remind us of. Okay, let's get committee members in favor of this resolution. Raise your real hands, or if you, unless you're not pictured here. Barbara, we've got Barbara. I'll vote in favor. Who else we have in the committee? Ken. Susan, Natasha. Is Doug still with us? No, I don't think so.
Doug's on the phone, I think, because he lost his internet.
Oh, is Doug on the phone?
Doug, can you hear us now? *6 would be unmuting, Doug.
Oh, there he is. I just see the symbol. Doug, are you able to show us how you're going to vote here?
*9 would be raising your hand if you can hear me. That would also work.
And write it in the chat as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Doug,
if he's on the phone, I'm not sure he can use the chat.
Well, Mark, do you want to, I don't know how to address.
We've done our best.
We've done our best. So far we have five, and I guess we give the opportunity for committee members to vote no, but I don't think Doug's doing that either. So let's call it 5-0-0-0. Let's then take a quick vote of non-committee board members who are in favor. We've got Diller, Kleiman, Brown, Diller, Kleiman, Brown. Is that it for non-committee board members?
That's everybody.
All right, that's going to be
that new famous law firm that just opened up north of.
Is Polly still on? Is Polly still with us?
Is Polly still with us? Yeah, Polly, are you voting? Good question, Susan. I don't see her responding. So far we've got 3-0-0-0. We're going to spend just another couple minutes at this meeting. If either Doug or Polly is able to get a vote in, we'll record those. So Margaret and John, thank you so much. Stick with us if you would for the next just a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Mark, for doing the PowerPoint, for your assistance. Appreciate it.
Yes. So just a couple of quick updates. On some things we have no updates. Our resolutions from a few months ago asking for enforcement of the dog leash law, we've heard nothing as far as I know, unless Mark or Stephen knows something more. Enforcement of traffic rules in Central Park, we've heard nothing more unless Mark or Stephen knows something more. But if, Matt Genrich, is there anything new on the Bull Moose Dog Run? We have somebody named Lauren, I think, who had a question about that. She's stuck with us all evening. The last we knew, Matt, if you're with us, there were a lot of concerns and complaints about the small stone surface that had been installed, which had not been the one that had been designed. And Parks Department was looking into changing or replacing that. Is there any update on that? Or do we still have Matt? There he is.
So I don't have any updates on that. I'd have to follow up with Steve Simon and see where we're at with that. I know that Friends of, I think, was it the last meeting? Friends of Morning, maybe it was 2 meetings ago, Friends of Morningside, or I'm sorry, not Friends of Morningside, Friends of Theodore Roosevelt had presented on sound mitigation possibilities. So they're still, still looking and researching that.
And Barbara's hand is up, so maybe she has something to tell us about this. Barbara?
No, there's nothing new, except that we hired an acoustical firm to take a look at the park and record the sounds that they hear with dog barking. I really have no update at this point.
Okay. And, oh wait, Doug McGowan has now appeared. I don't know, Mark, maybe you can figure that out with Doug's votes. So if there's nothing new on the Bull Moose Dog Run, that's our update. But I did tell, was it Lauren who has been with us all evening who wanted to ask something about that dog run? Mark, you see a Lauren in the attendees, although her hand is not up.
Looks like Doug can talk
now. Lauren should be able to unmute herself now.
Yeah, I just did. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm questioning, is anything happening with replacing the surface that was put into the dog run?
That's what I just asked. And
okay, I didn't hear that part. I only heard the acoustics.
Corey, I could speak to that for a moment.
Yes, Barbara.
We did buy a few sample bags of pea gravel, and the people from Bull Run who looked at it said that it was excellent and it's what they really wanted. So I think moving forward, either Friends of Roosevelt Park will pay for it, or hopefully Bull Run people will participate, or the Parks Department will pick up the tab. But all that is still very undecided.
Okay, because you do know that the surface is dangerous for animals. It's also for people. I had stones pop into my boot this week and actually cut the bottom of my foot. So
Lauren, we've had many discussions here about that. The surface was apparently quite disappointing and many people have had problems with it and their dogs have had problems with it. It's an ongoing investigation apparently to try to remediate. But that's all we can say tonight. And thanks for sticking with us, both Matt and to do that. I've got only one other quick update and it's a little more optimistic than the rest of them. About 2 months ago, we passed a resolution at our full board that our committee recommended to try to make our parks completely smoke-free. There are 3 exceptions in the New York City Clean Air Act with regard to no smoking in parks. The primary one is on perimeters of park sidewalk perimeters, but also parking lots and also malls like Broadway Mall. And Mark Levine, as you may remember, Councilmember Levine was all hot to work with us on that and everybody was hot to go on that. But then it turned out that what we sought precisely fit within was a subpart of a bill introduced by Councilmember Koo in 2018 that went nowhere. And when I tell you the rest of it, you'll understand why, never had a hearing. The first part of Councilmember Koo's bill asks to have smoking banned by people walking on, but not standing on, DOT sidewalks under DOT jurisdiction. And it's a particular concern in his area, his district in Flushing, where there's a lot of smoking of people walking on sidewalks, all around DOT sidewalks. The second part of Councilmember Koo's bill is exactly what we were seeking, which is to eliminate the 3 exceptions for the park no smoking bill. And the problem is with the way the procedures work in the council, if a council person wants a bill that is already part of another council person's bill, they can't introduce it as a separate bill. So Koo's bill had, and once Councilmember Levine's staff researched this and found out that what we were asking for, and he was so keen to help us with, was part of Koo's bill, we got stalled. We have Emily Watkins, who spoke with us earlier tonight, was helpful in speaking with staff members of both Levine and Koo. I've spoken to both of them, and where it is now is looking a little bit cautiously optimistic, which is that, as you know, most of our council members are term limited and won't be around after next year. One of the initiatives that Council Member Levine has as chair of the Health Committee is to bring quite a number of health-related bills to a hearing that he was aiming to have it sometime in February. This bill that we're seeking, or the Koo bill rather, that includes what we're seeking, would be one of those that he wants to bring to a hearing. Last I knew, he still needed the permission of the speaker, but didn't expect that would be a problem. What may happen if our bill is part of a package of a group of bills that are considered, is that the first part of the Koo bill, which is troublesome because you can sort of understand why it didn't go anywhere, even if you think it's a great idea, may end up getting dropped out as a compromise, or maybe not. But at least there is now a vehicle and a plan and a schedule for the council considering the legislation that we have asked for. So that is the cautiously optimistic update on that initiative that that came out of our committee. Anybody else have anything on that one? Mark or Stephen or anybody else?
Claudia, I had a question on Riverside Park, if you're finished with that.
Okay, so that's that update, which is the good one. I don't have any others. Ken, do you want to just then ask John or Margaret, whatever you want to ask?
Yeah, I've noticed the last 2 weeks, the lights on the promenade between about 88th and 84th Street have been on during the day. And I assume that's because Robert Moses designed the switching system and it hasn't been upgraded since then. But
Ken, I brought 2 sections of lights, and they actually somewhat more blocks at that area, and then another set in the hundreds to Jeff's attention just the other morning. And so John or Jeff, can you speak to that?
Yeah, we're aware of it, and as everyone on the call knows, it's DOT lighting, and they are working on the lights. But why they've been on for this long, I'm not sure. We're trying to find out, and just to let them know that, hey, in case you don't know, they didn't shut off after you were here the last time, because sometimes that's all it is. They think they've left them to go off on their own, and then for some reason they don't. So. We're trying to get that fixed.
Okay.
Are they? May I just say, are they timered or are they censored to the daylight?
It's a combination. Some have been. Well, no. Let me correct that. They are on photocells, but when they're turned on to work on them, that's a timer. they turn on a timer to just like you'd turn on a light in a hotel bathroom or something, to go off, and then sometimes they don't go off.
Yeah. And the last time, it was many, many, many months, that section north of 79th up to the mid 80s was on for months and months and months and months. Yep. Many of the lights just went out. I think the bulbs ran out, but it was a very lengthy, frustrating time. Finally, they seem to be turned off, but they're on again. Susan?
Just an update for those of you who are birders in the group. There's a greater white-fronted goose that's really quite rare, that's been seen in the lake in Central Park and also at the reservoir. So it's really worth keeping up with Manhattan Bird Alert to find out where that is. It's a real find.
Thank you. Mark.
So in the Q&A, since this person has been with us throughout the meeting, she was hoping for an update from John on the progress of the Soldiers and Sailors Monument. Oh, yeah. As I remember, that was something in the neighborhood of $30 million 2 years ago, so I'm sure it's more now. But anyway, is there anything to report there, John? This person has been with us all day night, so I wanted to make sure we asked her question.
Well, certainly I appreciate the person staying with us to ask that question. Sadly, no. It's a huge price tag. We're trying to figure out how to make lightning strikes so that we can get that money, but it's a huge price tag. There isn't it's not something really that can be broken down into parts, done in piecemeal. It really is going to just take a big chunk to do it. So yeah. Thank you.
My suggestion last time we talked about it was to move the monument into Central Park, have the Conservancy pay for it, and then move it back. I think that's a great idea.
Might be the cheapest way to go. All right, guys. We've had so many different topics tonight. It's been really fruitful. Anybody have anything else, either any update, or we've got 30 seconds for anybody to say anything they want. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, John and Margaret. Is Detective McDonald still with us? And I see his whatever you call that round thing there. So, and one last chance for either Polly or Doug McGowan to vote on our resolution. I think we don't have them. So thank you, everybody. Gosh, one other thing, Stephen, and as did Mark before, is putting the screws to us to get our committee agendas done early, to start planning now, if not sooner. So Stephen, we're going to do our best. Oh, and we also still need a webmaster so that Mark isn't, a Zoom master for our committee. So Mark isn't going to have to do this for us anymore. We're still working on that. Unless anybody has anything really hot they want to talk about right now to put on our agenda, we'll try to do that just offline among the committee during this next month. But any ideas you have, let's try to visit as soon as we can so we can meet Stephen's deadline.
And let me just add, I acknowledge, I think it'll be a little bit earlier next month for you guys, but the later committees is a little tougher. And what I tried to put in is, even if we start to talk about a couple issues, we can update it. But I think it'd be good to have something on there, even if it's conversations about Riverside Park. Even if they're general with speakers that need to be determined, but if particularly if there's presentations coming from Margaret or anyone, it would just be good to have one or two things. I'm okay updating them, but I'd like it, just let me finish what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I think we get a lot of criticism that people seem to come to the full board and they kind of, as they're preparing for the full board, they're looking at the website and they notice a lot of the stuff isn't updated and we don't have agendas. So
yeah, but
it's tougher in the ones that are later in the month. But the best we can do, or even put placeholders that get updated, it would be appreciated that it looks like we're making an effort.
Stephen, we do the best we can do. And I think what you really need, and I know Mark has dealt with too, is for reasons unclear, our staff is not getting these things onto the website. The first 2 items we have tonight didn't show up on the website until maybe less than a week ago, but I had actually sent those 2 items to our staff several weeks ago. I mean, both the first 2 items were scheduled really a long time ago.
Well, let's, I want you to wrap. We've had a long meeting. We could talk offline. I think there's a little bit of organization on both sides. The point is to get everyone. I've talked to this staff, and they are committed to getting everything up. If we hit that day, I've had a meeting about this. That if agendas are in on that Thursday, they will be up by that Friday, or whatever that day is, and we'll know. It'll be black and white when you look at that thing. Either got in or it didn't get up, and everyone kind of points the finger at each other a little bit, and that's some, I didn't get it, and it's, it's tough to monitor that. So I think I'm trying to create a process that makes it very simple and black and white, and I'm sure it'll still be complex, but that's the goal. But I do think we all agree that the community needs time to sort of see these things, and this was an incredible meeting today, and it should be up, and we should promote it, and we should have lots of people coming, because I think you guys did a great job. I saw all the hard work you did. And let's make sure that the community reaps the benefits of an incredible agenda like today. And that's my goal.
Well, this one was a particularly complicated one to get organized because there were so many moving parts, but thank everybody.
I saw all the hard work you did. I mean, you all should know Clary had 50 emails going through that week. So I'm just trying to create a process, but I saw she worked incredibly hard. It was a great meeting, great content. I think it's very valuable to the community. So the idea is, if we're going to do it, let the community know. So it benefits all of us. From that perspective.
That's what we try to do. And I sort of hope, probably all of us, that maybe we'll have not so many items next month. It'll be good items. All right. Are we all ready to say goodbye?
Bye.
All right. Everybody leave meeting. Bye. Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.